The whole earth seemed to rumble beneath him as Carlos Garcia stood there, standing up at the hulking, shadowy mass towering over him. His knees were shaking, and sweat was running down his face, but he clenched his jaw and stayed put. Furious voices hurled abuse at him from all angles. The stench of gasoline and wood smoke filled the air as the rumbling grew louder and louder. Gripping the camcorder tightly, Carlos pointed it straight up at the enormous excavator that was belching out smoke just feet away from him. Angry men in high-visibility jackets hung off the sides of it, making hand gestures at him and even throwing rocks. But Carlos found, much to his surprise, that his filming hand was steady. He panned the lens across the view in front of him. Excavators, lumberjacks, standing on cut-down tree trunks as thick as motorcycles, and then up into the lush canopies of the Amazon rainforest with its rich, dark green leaves, dense knotted vines, colorful fruits, and terrified ecosystem. Colorful birds watched the scene with nervous eyes, ready to take off at a moment's notice. All of the larger animals had either run away or been killed long before he showed up. Carlos swung the camcorder back down to the mercenaries chopping down his beloved rainforest and jabbed a finger at them.
You will not put your axe to the trunk of one more tree without first cutting me down!
Sick of waiting, the workmen climbed back into their vehicles and started revving their engines. It was all for show, Carlos told himself. That's all it was. They were just trying to scare him, but it was working. He was scared. The excavator in front of him crept slowly forward with tires that were taller than he was. A foot away, 6 inches away, and then an inch away. Carlos closed his eyes and readied himself to be run over, but the pain never came. A whining, chewing noise came from the engine, as if the vehicle was suddenly trapped on something, unable to turn its wheels. Carlos opened his eyes and tried to peer around the edge of the vehicle to see what was going on at the back. There was a new note in the voices of the workmen around him. They didn't seem so angry anymore, more fearful. Carlos went to take a step to see what was going on, but his foot caught and he was trapped. Looking down, he saw that he had somehow managed to lodge his foot beneath a small tree root. He tried to pull himself free, but the grip tightened. All of a sudden, the roots wound tightly around his boots, instantly crushing his foot and breaking every bone inside of it. Carlos screamed, but through the dullness of terror that was filling his mind, he realized no one else would hear him because they were all too busy screaming themselves. The root wasn't just tightening around his foot, now it was pulling him, dragging him. The dirt parted around his crushed foot as the root dragged him down into the earth. It wasn't that the ground was swallowing him. It was that the root was pulling so hard that the ground broke apart around his body. The pressure was unbelievable as first his ankle, then his knee, and then his hip went under. He felt the bones in his pelvis crunching and breaking as his other leg was forced into an unnatural split. It would be good to tell you that Carlos Garcia had a quick death from that point, that he felt no pain as his body was wrenched down into the earth. But no, he died very slowly, in a tremendous amount of fear and pain, as his lungs steadily filled up with earth, and his bones splintered and crunched one by one. One of the most admirable traits of the human race has always been our ability to find a home anywhere. From the Inuit people living in the Arctic Circle, all the way through to the ancient Egyptians building colossal pyramids in the middle of arid deserts, humanity always finds a way to make a home. Anthropologists can look all over the world and find traces of human settlements virtually anywhere. One of the remaining bastions where tribal populations can still exist and flourish is the Amazon rainforest. Life can be difficult and fiercely competitive, but the rich, fertile ground and abundance of food sources have meant that the Amazon has always been home to small human settlements. That is why researchers were so perplexed by the existence of a dark spot within the rainforest. After decades of work, not one trace of human life has been found within this area. For good reason. For a very good reason. Foundation agent Natalie Richards made her way quickly down the stairs, spiraling downwards and downwards. She had never much enjoyed the descent. Something about waking up in the morning and knowing that she would wind up back down here again went beyond the usual Monday blues. It was more insidious. She had barely slept all week. It wasn't just the sticky heat of the barracks at the Paragon South America Forward Operating Site that kept her awake. It was the paranoia. She would just lie there in her bed, experiencing these delusions that at any point, a root would shoot up out of the ground and wrap itself around her neck. It never happened, of course. Their accommodations had been built high up, suspended among the trees away from the site to mitigate any risk. But still, it would always get worse when it was her turn on the observation deck. Down and down she descended through the tower, feeling that horrible, pressurizing feeling that tells you you're going further underground. The air she was breathing down here was filtered by enormous top-of-the-line systems that made sure the air within the tower was clean and fresh. There was an entire department dedicated to the filtration system set up in each of the 4 towers. And yet, she couldn't help imagining that tendrils of fog creeping through the vents to get to her. Suddenly, she was there on the observation deck. She hadn't had time to brace herself, so the view, even though she had seen it dozens of times before, punched her right in the stomach and left her feeling dizzy. On the other side of the glass was a void. The research team had told her that it was 53 kilometers across at its widest point and 42 kilometers at its deepest. Those kinds of numbers meant nothing to her. The reality was that it was darkness, a rotten abyss, open and unending. She was in Tower Charlie, one of 4 observation towers suspended upside down from the roof of the cavern. At the bottom of the tower, what usually would have been the top, was the searchlight. Its beam cut steadily through the abyss like a lighthouse in the dead of night. The beam drifted through empty space. The only way you could even tell it was lit up was the slight haze in the air. Suddenly, the searchlight found its target. Just a branch at first, nothing thicker than a car, snaking its way to join with another and another, growing thicker by multitudes each time, until suddenly the light was shining on the trunk, 380 meters in diameter, 9.2 kilometers tall. The colossal tree hung upside down from the roof of the void, dangling into the abyss. Natalie Richards gulped and tried to breathe deeply so as not to lose her balance. It was her job now to stare at this tree for the next 3 hours. She felt sick. SCP-6666 is a colossal botanical entity that can be found near the coordinates 4 degrees 51 minutes 29.4 seconds south by 67 degrees 44 minutes 12.6 seconds west in the Amazon rainforest. Research has been ongoing for several years to fully map and understand the scale of both the tree itself and the void in which it inhabits. Project Paragon was instituted in an attempt to understand and one day contain the growth of this entity. Above ground, an exclusion zone has been set up covering the area where the roots of this tree have grown through to the surface. A 1-kilometer buffer has been established just outside of the circumference, with a heavily armed security presence patrolling it at all times. Unfortunately, due to the nature of SCP-6666, this buffer zone has to be moved on a normal weekly basis. While samples taken from this SCP seem to indicate that it is totally dead, organically speaking, the root system still possesses a degree of autonomy, being able to move and grow at rates unseen in typical plant species. The roots are capable of breaking through the surface and constricting organic life living above, primarily targeting humans, but also targeting buildings, vehicles, and machinery. It is no wonder then that there is no trace of any human settlements, either contemporary or historical, anywhere near SCP-6666. She knew that the Foundation has been at a loss for progress over the prior few months. Their equipment and resources were deteriorating faster than they were making progress with their research. No one had been down to the floor yet. They were all too afraid to. Descending down through the void, Agent Richard saw something that made her heart drop. Out of the gap in the trunk of SCP-6666 emerged a hand. It clung to the bark with enormous fingers, straining and pulling as the entity dragged itself out from its hiding place. Arm after arm emerged, with one carrying a spear that must have been 20 meters long. 5 arms in total clung to the tree as SCP-6666-A surveyed the vehicle flying past it. The entity didn't swipe at the VTOL. It didn't do anything to attack it, but but it just watched before slowly turning its face towards Agent Richards in the observation tower. It had 6 eyes arranged into columns running down the length of its face. It had no nose, no mouth, and no ears, but it saw her. It saw her even better than she could see it. She felt panic rising in her chest. Meanwhile, the research team and the VTOL checked their equipment one more time. They had been outfitted with a brand new set of custom pressurized insertion suits, but they weren't stupid. Nothing was 100% safe from reach, and having studied the fog down here for month after month, they knew just how deadly it could be if there was even the slightest contamination. Down and down, the craft descended kilometer after kilometer through utter blackness, until through the front window, they were able to see a thick layer of fog coating the basement of the cabin. The lead researcher stood at the front of the VTOL and gave them one more briefing, emphasizing the importance of moving slowly and safely, not touching anything that could compromise the integrity of their suits, and making sure to collect as many physical samples as possible to take back up to the surface for study. Agent Richards stared at the demon in front of her. Even through the very enforced glass, she could hear the low rumbling of its voice as it spoke to her. Researchers have been trying to understand what language it was for years now, but with no luck. It was either so ancient or so alien that it was beyond their ability to translate. The entity had a name, however. From speaking to researchers on Project Paragon adjacent to SCP-4840, they have been able to name the creature, the Demon Hector, one of 4 primeval entities originating from a long-since lost near-human civilization, millions of years old at least. Who knows? It may even predate the existence of Earth entirely. Of course, we can't simply mention the concept of 4 primeval demons without telling you a little bit about the other 3, some of which you might even recognize. One of them, known as SCP-2254 to the SCP Foundation, is also known as the Demon Lahire. Much like Hector, Lahire is a 6-eyed being of immense power, presiding over his own domain. He is invisible to the naked eye and spends his free time influencing the minds of human beings, when he's not impregnating them with fleshy masses. Next comes the entity known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-4840-B, also known as the Demon Lancelot. Once a brave knight of King Cyrus VIII von Apollyon before being corrupted, this immensely powerful being resides in SCP-4840, the flying city of Autopopodopolis. And rounding out this elite group of mysterious demonic entities comes SCP-6765-D, also known as the Demon Ogier, a horrific cloaked entity that sits atop a throne of blood. It's widely believed these 4 entities were cursed by an unknown and immensely powerful thaumatological being long ago, doomed to hide in ancient places and live until they fulfill their true purpose, playing a part in some known event that will someday compromise all of mankind. And now, Agent Richards was face to face with 1/4 of the apocalypse. Agent Richards stared as the Demon Hector spoke to her. Dozens of kilometers below, the VTOL touched down in the fog. As soon as the deployment doors opened, the thick gas filled the aircraft, obscuring their vision. Turning on their helmet cameras, the researchers stepped out into the unknown as their live feeds were watched by their colleagues on the surface. Smooth stone surfaces covered with etchings swam into view. Some kind of ancient language carved into stone? The remnants of some early South American civilization? No, the researchers on the surface knew immediately that what they were looking at was far too advanced, far too old. Was it? Was it even human at all? A scream filled the control room. A breach in a researcher's suit. The fog that he breathed in contained just a few particles, set the neurons in his brain on fire before shutting down his nervous system entirely in a matter of seconds. The rest of the researchers all ran back to the VTOL in fear, but the fog around them was so dense that they couldn't find it anywhere. It could have been 3 feet away from them, and they would have never even known. One by one, the researchers in the foggy forest dropped dead. On the surface, the research team sighed and closed the video feeds. There was a reason they'd sent them down with live cameras. No one had really expected them to return. And all the while, Agent Natalie Richards stood trembling and watching as the Demon Hector hung from the upside-down tree and chanted at her in his impossible language. She didn't care what any of the botanists said. This tree was not dead. The demon readied its spear and leaped at her. In the long history of the world, The planet has played host to a wide variety of ancient civilizations. There are far too many of those for any one video to cover. People make it their careers to discover and catalog the civilizations that preceded us in the modern era. Archaeologists and historians make it their life's work to learn everything there is to know about these mighty empires and kingdoms that span vast swaths of land where there are now dozens of countries. A lot of these civilizations are famous, even school children know about them. Take a look at the Roman Empire, for example. Everyone knows about the mighty Roman Empire. Julius Caesar took control of the Roman Republic and created the empire that would go on to be one of the largest empires in history at the time. It controlled practically everything in Europe and North Africa, and even parts of Asia. The Romans made amazing advancements in culture, architecture, law, and practically everything else. In fact, their legacy can even be seen in pop culture today. The American Senate is modeled off the Roman Senate, and practically every nation in the world has their own kind of wine, a Roman invention. Or take the Macedonian Empire. A lot of people don't know its name, but you almost definitely know the person who created it, Alexander the Great. At only 20, he took his father's throne. Then he began launching military expeditions, and it soon became clear that young Alexander was a brilliant tactician. Never defeated in battle, he managed to extend his vast empire across all of West Asia and North Africa, stretching all the way to Egypt and India. Like Caesar would go on to do after him, he managed to create one of the largest empires in history. Except he did it all before he even turned 30. Though he died young and his empire was split apart by his generals, he brought Greek thought, culture, and philosophy, not to mention science, to the far reaches of Inner Asia. And of course, there is the Mongol Empire, led by the fearsome Genghis Khan. The Mongols, a nomadic people from Central Asia, were divided into dozens of distinct tribes until Genghis Khan united them under one flag. And from there, they spread outward violently into the rest of Asia, conquering China, Korea, Eastern Europe, and practically all of Asia. In doing so, they created the largest empire in history and killed somewhere near 40 million people in their conquests, 10% of the world's population at the time. But they also created a safe trade route from China to Europe, what is now known as the Silk Road, and their innovations with cavalry would go on to inform warfare using horses for the next 800 years. Moving out of Asia, there are also the legendary Mayans. The Mayans were more of a loose confederation of different tribes, working together to advance a common civilization. They didn't conquer as much land as the others, only one area in Central America, but they crafted a complex society with laws, civic duties, social rules, and extremely advanced religious rites and architecture. If you go to South America today, you can still see the remnants of their empire. Step pyramids that look sort of like ziggurats, deep in the South American jungle interior. They invented astronomy, calendars, writing, and many forms of art like mosaics, all without contact with European society. Needless to say, the advancements empires have made throughout history are so important, we use them in our daily lives all the time. And we know a lot about these ancient empires too. How could we not? They've made massive impacts on the planet and population, not to mention religion, culture, law, society as a whole. But what if there was an empire on the planet that was larger and more advanced than all of the ones we just looked through? And not just more advanced by a little bit. So advanced that they were creating nuclear reactors well before Alexander was taking his first steps, or Plutarch was trying to complete a history of the Greeks. So advanced that we still don't totally understand what they were capable of. I'd certainly call that anomalous, wouldn't you? And that's not all. What if this empire also managed to stay hidden from modern science for centuries? They didn't stay alive, but their ruins have never been found by the scientific community. Their relics have been squirreled away from the eyes of the world over the decades. You'd never find a reference to the Mechanite Empire in a history textbook or in a museum, and that's for a very good reason. The SCP Foundation has spent an extremely large amount of time and money ensuring that the evidence of this ancient empire never comes out to the rest of the world. But even if a culture creates anomalies, is the culture itself anomalous? Does it need to be contained? Especially if they're all long dead and their technology has degraded into unusability. Well, maybe. Except their technology is doing just fine. 2,000 years and counting, their technology is still working perfectly. In some cases better than our modern devices. How can that be possible? How can that not be anomalous? Well, as unbelievable as it might seem, it's true. We'll dive more into what exactly this empire out of Greece was in a bit, but for now we're going to look at an SCP file associated with them. Except this one couldn't be picked up, stuffed in a box, and shipped off to a containment locker in Site-19. You'll see why in a minute. But for now, let's just take a look at the file. SCP-2406 lacks any images or flashy documentation, so no clues there. Unless it's not possible to photograph the anomaly for some reason. The object class is safe, and the containment procedures aren't very long. A site, Provisional Site-31, has been constructed around SCP-2406 and is under the cover of a Kazakhstani military base. Provisional sites are temporary sites that the Foundation puts up in the field to contain an anomaly that can't easily be transported somewhere else for containment. And if it's a Kazakhstani military facility, the anomaly is probably somewhere in Kazakhstan and can't be moved. Seems reasonable enough. All personnel who work directly with SCP-2406 are required to wear a Type A hazmat suit when in contact with the anomaly, and to undergo a full decontamination bath upon exiting. Whatever SCP-2406 is, being in direct contact with it can be dangerous to humans. So the Foundation uses specialized hazardous material suits, the big yellow jumpsuits you see near radiation or chemical spill sites. On top of that, an armed contingent of guards are to remain in place in and around Provisional Site-31 to ensure no one unauthorized accesses the anomaly. Though you'd have to wonder why anyone would try to access a military base. The containment procedures close out by declaring that anyone wanting to directly interact with SCP-2406-1, whatever it is, needs to get authorization from their site director. So, SCP-2406 has at least one sub-anomaly to deal with. Obviously, the Foundation is very interested in keeping this anomaly, or these anomalies, secret and protected at all costs, as well as limiting human exposure to something potentially dangerous. Now, let's take a look at the description. SCP-2406 is a mechanical automaton that's 93 meters tall and weighs approximately 210 metric tons. For the Americans among us, that's about 300 feet in height and 230 tons, over 450,000 pounds. No wonder the Foundation couldn't move it. After investigating, research concluded that SCP-2406 wasn't sentient, so it wasn't a robot or cyborg or artificial intelligence. An automaton is a machine to perform a specific task, and this thing, whatever it is, was controlled by at least 6 different operators, if not more. They piloted the machine using 160 different valves and levers within the torso, head, and chest of the automaton. And if it has a head and chest, it has limbs. Limbs that were controlled by a combination of pneumatics, hydraulics, and clockwork machinery. But controlling is one thing. How the heck does something like this get the power to move? The answer is a nuclear reactor embedded in its torso, with power cables running to its arms and legs. Yep, unbelievable as it may seem, this ancient curiosity was powered by the same source our modern aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines use. SCP-2406 was discovered on August 7, 1985, in the Aralkum Desert, but not by the Foundation. The Aralkum Desert used to be part of the Aral Sea before the Soviets drained part of it. It was during one of these drainings that the Russian military discovered SCP-2406 by tracking the radiation coming from it. As soon as they realized what they found wasn't some sort of abandoned warhead or uranium deposit, they called in the GRU's P Division, the unit of the Soviet government who dealt with anomalies, in the same way the Foundation did. They kept custody of the anomaly, but only for a few years. When the USSR collapsed in 1991, the Foundation stepped in with their agents and took control of the anomaly while everyone else in the area was busy dealing with the political fallout. They immediately began performing research and learned that the material SCP-2406 is made of isn't just one metal, but a toughened alloy of copper, zinc, nickel, lead, and iron. The mixture is why the metal looks bronze, despite not having any bronze in it. They also found 2 markings on it. One was on the outside of its back and showed the Aegean numeral for 9. Does that mean there are at least 8 more of these things buried somewhere? Maybe, but the Foundation hasn't found any of them. What's more interesting is that the numeral is Aegean, Greek, despite SCP-2406 lying in a lake in the Aral Sea, pretty far from Greece. The front of the anomaly, its chest, has an intricate symbol of a hammer striking an anvil on it. The right arm of the anomaly has a nozzle with piping attached to it. The piping leads to a pressurized chamber within SCP-2406 that is empty. But the Foundation did manage to find trace residue of various chemicals, such as pine resin, naphtha, quicklime, calcium phosphide, and sulfur inside the corners of the tank. Not coincidentally, those are the exact same chemicals used to create Greek fire, a primitive chemical weapon similar to napalm that the ancient Greeks used in warfare. Between this and the Aegean numeral, the Foundation judged that SCP-2406 was almost definitely constructed in Greece and brought here for some reason. The left arm of the anomaly isn't attached to it. In fact, initial reports said it was torn off at the shoulder and couldn't be found with the rest of it. But it seems that the Foundation managed to recover it since, detailed in one of the addenda in the file. Chemicals weren't the only thing they found inside SCP-2406. When they busted the main access plate open, researchers found something decidedly more morbid. 6 different human skeletons located inside its torso area were removed and cataloged before being carbon dated to 1100 BC, over 3,000 years old. And they were all wearing an extremely strange set of armor. While it looked Greek, it was made of a strange lead-copper alloy and filled with asbestos lining. Presumably, the armor was designed to absorb the radiation put out by SCP-2406's reactor. There were also tubes from the helmets leading to the outside, so they could breathe safe air. One of the levers pumped water into the tubes so that the pilots didn't die of thirst, and another tube was near the groin, probably so they could pee. Seems like the designers ensuring that whoever was piloting SCP-2406 could do so for hours or days. The Foundation ensured through testing that SCP-2406 doesn't work. The limbs don't move, and many of the levers have rusted or broken. All of that damage from disuse is repairable, but there is even more extensive damage from combat. The limbs and head were first discovered run through by long, sharp spikes made of an unknown substance. Though it feels like chitin, its molecular structure is closer to coral, and on top of that, it's biological and contains some elements of human DNA. Parts of its limbs are also crushed or indented with a segmented pattern, like a boa constrictor wrapping around its prey. The evidence suggests that SCP-2406 was in an intense fight with some sort of giant monster and lost. But that's all in the past. SCP-2406 also has a more present problem: its reactor. It melted through the back of the anomaly, penetrating the Earth, and seems to still be burning incredibly hot and radioactive nearly a kilometer under the surface. Engineers think that when it was intact, it works similarly to natural nuclear reactions rather than modern reactors, like when a uranium deposit begins to undergo fission. If nothing else, it means that SCP-2406's designers were studying those, and were far more advanced scientifically than any other culture on the face of the planet at the time that we know of. While they were investigating the wreck, Foundation personnel also discovered something interesting: a watertight ceramic jar, like the ones ancient Egyptians used to preserve organs. When they broke the seal, they found 2 tightly bound scrolls written in a unique language resembling Mycenaean Greek. It took 10 years of research for the Foundation's best linguists to translate the scrolls. What they found confirmed their theory. The scrolls were religious and written by a group called the Followers of Mechane, the ancient precursors to what we now call the infamous Church of the Broken God, an anomalous cult that seeks to rebuild their deity and make themselves more than human. The Foundation's had run-ins with them in the past, but the documents indicate that 3,000 years ago, they weren't just a cult, they were an empire. The first scroll was translated to the following: "The Colossi were constructed in her schema. The Colossi were constructed to defend, secure, contain. The enemy, Grand Karcist Ion, betrayer of man, destroyer of progress, sorcerer king of Aritum, a desolate domain of failed and fallen creation, built with the body's flesh of dead gods. Upon a throne of black ambition the enemy plots. The enemy is not a priest, they are a merchant, and they have sold the whole world totality. The Colossi were constructed in her schema. The Colossi were constructed to defend, secure, contain. The profane tools must be broken, uncreated. Drink deep the silver blood of Mechane. May her sacrifice not be in vain." Strange, but definitely religious. It seems to be a dedication to the broken god Mechane. The Colossi were created to fight their ancient enemy, the Circus. But the second document is much more interesting. This is a testament of Matriarch Eupraxia, Legate's faithful, servant of Mechane. I am not a warrior, but all warriors are dead, breaking themselves upon the enemy's host. The enemy has set their plan into motion. The Sorcerer King surrounds himself with corpses. To fight is to grow his legions. Egypt retreats from the world. The Hittites have fallen into chaos. The conspirators of Crete have sacrificed their own. The Aegean have fallen into barbarism. The city of 1,000 pillars is forever lost, has always been lost. Even the Deva grow desperate, with the enemy at their border. The center collapses, kingdoms crumble, the damage is done. The light of reason flickers and wanes. But Mechane sacrificed herself so that we might be free. We refuse to return to that darkness. We would rather die. But the siege at Euros was won. We must strike while the metal is hot, and thus we march for Kythera, at the end of all things. We have crossed the wine-dark sea. We have seen villages ravaged by the Red Death. We have seen the dead, the dying, and the deathless. We cast the accursed to holy flame. We enter his desolate domain, and in our left hand we carry our answer. We cannot undo what has been done, but we can delay the Sarkic dawn. So it seems that the ancient Mechanite Empire were once at war with another empire, the hated Sarkists. Losing and all their allies dying, they poured their resources into these massive mechs and sent them deep into enemy territory, equipped with some sort of doomsday weapon as a hope for success. What happens next is, unfortunately, a mystery. On December 12th of 1998, the Foundation found something almost 30 kilometers away from SCP-2406 during a routine patrol. At first, the researchers were confused. Had they found another wreck, one of the other 8 mentioned? Or perhaps the body of the mysterious creature SCP-2406 had fallen in battle with. But after excavating it, they realized they had found something they hadn't even been looking for to begin with. SCP-2406's left arm. The way it landed suggested that it had been torn off during the battle and hurled away. But what monster could possibly throw something that heavy 30 entire kilometers? Either way, what the Foundation found attached to SCP-2406's arm is much more interesting. The researchers aren't sure what it is, but it's much different from the rest of SCP-2406. It seems to be some kind of weapon, but one that's not made of any metals on Earth, and with an incredibly anomalous design. The Foundation personnel, not sure of what to make of it, designated it SCP-2406-1. Its purpose is similarly unknown, and the consensus seems to be that whatever it is, it far exceeds human understanding. But what the Foundation is sure of is that it seems to bend reality near it, though they're not sure how because it doesn't seem to affect anything. The Foundation's best minds are stumped by it. All they can say for certain is that if it was ever repaired, powered up, and activated, it could do unprecedented damage to local reality. So interaction with it was highly regulated, and the Foundation put it away with the rest of SCP-2406. Climbers attempting to summit Mount Everest and stand on the top of the world have their work cut out for them. Dangers are everywhere on the long climb. There's a risk of extreme altitude sickness, unpredictable winds, and freezing weather. There's also the threat of avalanches, great unstoppable tidal waves of snow that can bury a person alive in seconds or strand them, leaving them to freeze to death cold and alone. It's a sad reality that not everyone that visits Everest comes back down again, and rarely does a climbing season go by that the mountain doesn't claim yet another victim. Situated on the border between China and Nepal, in a sub-range of the Himalayas of Tibet, Everest is one of the 7 wonders of the natural world. With an elevation of 29,031 feet, or 8,848 meters, Mount Everest has attracted many experienced mountain climbers over the decades. But even for the most experienced mountaineers, the ascension up its snowy slopes is far from easy. Deaths occurring on Mount Everest are nothing new, and hundreds of people are believed to have died attempting to ascend the treacherous peak. Sadly, due to the risks involved with carrying heavy loads down off the mountain, Many of those who die on Everest are doomed to stay there forever, their frozen bodies serving up as their own grave markers. It's difficult enough to move your own body up and down Everest, and in many situations, bringing a body back down is simply impossible. The bodies of these lost souls are scattered all across and sometimes underneath the surface of Mount Everest. But some of those bodies are different from the others and have a special name within the files of the SCP Foundation. They call them SCP-5140. SCP-5140 is the designation given to a number of frozen bodies which are found all across Everest. It is unclear exactly how many instances of SCP-5140 there are, though some estimates have placed the number at somewhere between 1 and 200. At present, it is unknown if all the instances of SCP-5140 are dead bodies belonging to climbers who met tragedy on the tallest mountain in the world, or if some of them are something else entirely. But while their origin is unclear, if you come into contact with a 5140 instance, there won't be any doubt that it's different from the normal body of a dead climber. That's because SCP-5140 corpses are a lot like vampires in some ways. That isn't to say that they actually are vampires. They certainly are not undead and cannot function after death. But much like a vampire traditionally drains blood to survive, these bodies drain heat. SCP-5140 corpses are ectoentropic, meaning they do not adhere to the normal laws of thermodynamics. Whenever these cadavers are exposed to sources of heat, including human body heat, the corpse will instantly drain the source of any and all thermal energy. However, the temperature of these SCP-5140 bodies remains the same, regardless of how much heat they are able to drain, staying at a constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. Should any living person come into direct contact with one of the SCP-5140 corpses, the body will absorb their natural body heat, bringing their victim's own temperature down to 10 degrees Celsius and causing them to die. And once they have died, their body then becomes a new instance of SCP-5140. As a quick side note, this might feel vaguely reminiscent of another anomaly, which features seemingly inert dead bodies that are hazardous to anyone around them. SCP-2316. This anomaly is a powerful mimetic hazard consisting of a large number of drowned human corpses. These corpses are extremely hazardous to approach at even a considerable distance, as the mimetic hazard inherent to the anomaly causes those affected to recognize the bodies in the water as people they know, particularly from their childhood. Like a siren's call, the victims are lured into the water, believing that the familiar bodies are calling to them. If the victims aren't stopped, quarantined, and given amnestic treatment, they are essentially considered lost. They will walk into the water and be absorbed into the collective, becoming just another body floating in the water. While the Foundation doesn't currently believe that there is any official connection between the two anomalies, the similarities are undeniable and worth taking into consideration. Moving on. At present, it is unclear whether SCP-5140 corpses are caused by some sort of infection or parasite that spreads among the bodies uncovered at Mount Everest. If this is the case, the Foundation has yet to uncover the patient zero, the root cause of these infected bodies. There is also little to determine why a deceased body requires the absorption of heat, as well as how it achieves this and also keeps its own temperature low but not frozen. Given that interacting with an instance of SCP-5140 can be fatal, it does seem that these anomalous properties can be passed through contact and exposure, like a disease or a parasite. But there have been no observed anomalous effects among any living person visiting Mount Everest. There is a possibility that the SCP-5140 corpses have developed some form of posthumous mutation that has come as a result of being killed during an Everest avalanche and buried in the snow, their bodies starved of heat after death. After all, Everest is known for its cold temperatures, occasionally reaching as low as 1 degree Fahrenheit or minus 17 degrees Celsius. Not to mention the difference in air pressure at such high altitudes, as well as frequent high-speed freezing cold winds. At the summit of Mount Everest, wind speeds can reach up to 280 kilometers per hour. That is equivalent to 175 miles per hour. And high-speed winds have even been known to catch mountain climbers off guard and send them plummeting to their deaths. Perhaps the combination of these conditions, The freezing temperature, the air pressure, and the winds have triggered some sort of change in a number of the bodies unfortunate enough to never leave the snow-covered slopes of Mount Everest. Either that, or these abandoned corpses left in such extreme cold could be the perfect home. Maybe some form of unknown and so far undetected parasite is capable of inhabiting these frozen bodies, and can spread to other living hosts by draining them of their body heat. Stranger things have certainly happened at the SCP Foundation, and that could possibly explain why anyone interacting with an SCP-5140 corpse meets the same grisly fate. Regardless of what causes these abnormalities, or why the SCP-5140 bodies have only been uncovered at Mount Everest, close contact with the corpses often result in casualties and fatalities. Naturally, this is a cost the SCP Foundation likes to avoid as often as it can. The nasty habit SCP-5140 corpses have of draining a person's body heat makes it impractical to bring them back to a Foundation research facility for testing, as does the fact that they're on the tallest mountain in the world. Instead, MTF Delta-14 have been tasked with keeping these heat-thirsty cadavers contained to Mount Everest. Mobile Task Force Delta-14, also known under the codename Winter Wonderland, is formed of a group of particularly adept mountaineers, and experts in understanding and adapting to particularly brutal terrain without drawing attention to themselves. These covert operatives are tasked with periodically climbing Mount Everest and keeping SCP-5140 contained. It is this team's job to locate any new instance of SCP-5140 bodies and bury them in the snow. In doing so, the goal is to prevent any unwitting mountain climbers from stumbling upon one of these bodies and potentially becoming a new instance themselves. Meanwhile, the Foundation is pushing for both Nepal and Tibet to tighten restrictions on climbing permits. But of course, the money that Mount Everest tourism brings to these two countries has likely impeded this. According to the Foundation's file on SCP-5140, an incident occurred during one of Mobile Task Force Delta-14's annual Everest expeditions. Members of MTF Delta-14 had been traversing towards the Everest summit, encountering more and more of the SCP-5140 bodies as they made their way up the mountain. Just as they were instructed to do so, the team buried each of the frozen corpses they came across under a blanket of snow. The Delta-14s noticed, though, that there had been a much higher number of the frosty cadavers on this mission, speculating that perhaps Mount Everest's high winds had blown the snow off of ones they had already buried on previous missions. One of the Delta-14s, a man named Charlie Smith, was in correspondence with his colleagues at their base camp. Charlie reported that one of his fellow Winter Wonderlanders, Patrick, had touched one of the SCP-5140 corpses when the team reached the summit, and that he was now buried according to protocols after becoming an SCP-5140 instance himself. As they began their descent from atop Everest, Charlie sent an urgent communication to base camp, reporting that he'd uncovered 3 more SCP-5140 bodies at an abandoned campsite. Except these 3 instances were different from any he had encountered before. These corpses were somehow still moving. Attempting to hurry down the mountain, Charlie reported that a mass of SCP-5140 corpses were blocking his path, and draining another one of his squad mates, Arnold, of his body heat to make him one of them. Arnold had been carrying the team's provisions, including their oxygen reserves, to combat the lack of breathable air at Mount Everest's high altitude. Charlie tried in vain to use his flare gun to clear the path, hoping to distract the now walking cadavers with a heat source, but it had no effect. His final message to base camp warned the rest of Delta-14 to not come to the summit of Everest, with Charlie frantically urging them to not let climbers anywhere near it. His final message simply stated that the mountain is danger. A rescue division of Mobile Task Force Delta-14 arrived just under 2 hours later, tracking Charlie's last known location via a GPS beacon. Strangely, despite the frantic messages from Charlie, there were no signs of any SCP-5140 instances. None of the piles of corpses he had warned them about could be seen above the snow, and certainly none of them were moving. It wasn't long before the rescue team found Charlie, though. He was dead, but not drained of heat or turned into another instance of SCP-5140. No, sadly, after bringing their fallen comrade back to base, an autopsy revealed that Charlie had died likely the same way so many other climbers on Everest had. He had suffered from a lack of oxygen. Further examination of his gear revealed that Charlie's oxygen intake valve had been damaged earlier while the squad had been climbing to the summit of Mount Everest. His teammates Arnold, Hillary, and and Patrick Edmund were also discovered on the mountain, but only Patrick had been turned into an SCP-5140 instance. Arnold had simply died from exposure, just like Charlie. The rescue team concluded that due to lack of adequate oxygen, Charlie Smith had hallucinated the sight of SCP-5140 corpses moving and blocking his path, spending his final moments in terror as the mountain's conditions slowly killed him. The Foundation is still unsure exactly what causes bodies to become instances of SCP-5140, or even how many of them are on Everest, but a major and troubling development has recently been made. After an increase in global temperature led to a large avalanche that resulted in a large portion of the mountain that had previously been covered in thick snow being exposed, the Foundation sent planes that were equipped with thermal imaging equipment to scan the mountain. What they found was as confusing as it was terrifying. The SCP-5140 corpses aren't just spread across the surface of Mount Everest, they are much of Everest. The mountain itself is just a huge pile of corpses, just waiting to drain the life from anyone who attempts to scale it and turn them into a permanent part of the peak. So if you were planning a trip to the Himalayas, hoping to scratch climb Mount Everest off your bucket list, maybe give it a pass. Otherwise, you might find that the climb is even colder than you were expecting. No matter how different we are from each other, everybody has a shadow. It is a constant companion, always with us no matter where we go. Unless where we go is in a room with all the lights off, of course. As a child, shadows seemed mysterious or even terrifying. But as we get older, we learn that shadows are nothing to be concerned about, just your body blocking light. Of course, at the SCP Foundation, nothing is what it seems, and a shadow is never just a shadow. Near an abandoned Air Force base in Afghanistan, nestled next to a set of human remains, the Foundation discovered an unusual object capable of turning a simple shadow into a prison. SCP-272 is an iron nail, 11.5 centimeters in length, covered in engravings of an unknown origin. The engravings have not yet been identified or traced to a specific civilization, but the research staff assigned to the object have described them as captivating but scary. It was discovered during a sweep pulled out of a rock face by a member of Foundation personnel. At first, he believed it to be an ordinary nail, until he dropped it. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, he was unable to move from the spot. He stood there calling out for help for 20 minutes before another member of personnel picked up the nail and he regained full range of motion. SCP-272, like many other objects in Foundation containment, is almost eerily mundane. Aside from the engravings on its surface, the nail looks like any other nail you might find scattered on the ground. Its true nature only reveals itself if you happen to drop it. Determined to learn more about the nail's properties, limitations, and potential unknown adverse effects, the Foundation conducted a series of experiments. The first experiment was conducted at the Discovery site for SCP-272, the rock face in Afghanistan. A D-class, referred to as D-272-01, was handed the nail and instructed to hammer it into his shadow, in the area of his feet. Once the nail was 2/3 into the rock, 01 was no longer able to move. He attempted to run but could not lift his feet. He stood there sweating and immobile until he collapsed from heat stroke. At this point, a researcher intervened and attempted to carry the unconscious man out of the sun. No matter how hard they tried, his body could not be moved until they removed the nail. 01 was taken to a hospital and administered fluids and a medical exam, and testing was suspended for the day. After determining that the nail immobilizes its victims by trapping their shadows and them in place, the research team wanted to test the limitations of this effect. If the nail needs a shadow to work, then what happens when there is no shadow present? A new D-Class 02 was selected and brought into the same Discovery site. This time, however, they went after dark at approximately 10 p.m. The nail was dropped at 02's feet and embedded itself in the earth without needing to be hammered. Then 02 was instructed to walk 10 meters away from the nail. He managed this easily with no adverse effects. The experiment was relatively uneventful until 02 attempted to flee the scene and was terminated for his escape attempt. The body was disposed of, and the research team made note of their findings. The nail does not work if the subject is not casting a shadow. So if total darkness kept the nail from working, and bright light meant it worked completely, what would happen if the light changed in the middle of the experiment? 2 hours before sunrise, the very same night, another D-Class was brought into the site. The subject, 03, was instructed to walk away from the nail in a straight line until he was told to stop. 2 hours later, when the sun came up, all hell broke loose. 03 was pulled into pieces as his body attempted to make its way back to the direction of the nail by any means necessary. His legs were yanked back towards the nail and were collected several feet from it. His torso, on the other hand, was located 106 meters away from the nail, with signs of road rash and severe trauma. 3 cleanup teams were required to remove all evidence of the carnage. The nail was removed to Test Facility 25-H, and the team decided to put an end to any further experimentation involving Sunrise. Several lighting-based experiments followed the Sunrise disaster, all with relatively uneventful findings. The research continued in this way until one member of the research team, Dr. Cho, posited a new question. What happens if the nail is embedded in 2 overlapping shadows? 2 other members of D-Class personnel, 04 and 05, were positioned under stadium lights so that their shadows overlapped. The nail was dropped onto a point where the shadows were on top of each other and promptly embedded itself in the ground. Both subjects were instructed to attempt to move away from the nail. 05 was completely trapped, unable to move her feet or walk away. Meanwhile, 04 was able to move freely with no consequences except for a feeling of a chill. So the nail is only able to hold one person at a time. In an attempt to see if there is a pattern present in terms of which person the nail will hold, if presented with multiple options, a follow-up experiment was conducted with 8 members of D-Class personnel, ranging in age from 18 to 59 years old. All 8 subjects were placed with their shadows overlapping, and the nail was dropped onto the point of overlap. The youngest subject, an 18-year-old boy, was held still by the nail. The other 7 test subjects let out a scream when the nail hit the ground, and were reported to shiver throughout the duration of the test. When the 18-year-old was taken out of the study and the experiment was repeated, the second youngest person in the group was held in place. The experiment was repeated 4 more times, removing a subject each time until subject 07 collapsed from hypothermia. The next experiment was conducted outside, in a grassy field near the test site. Subject 05 was placed on the grass and handed a shovel. Once the nail was firmly in the subject's shadow, she was instructed to dig it out of the dirt. 05 began digging and proceeded normally at first. After 90 seconds, however, she fell to the ground screaming in agony. A medic rushed to her side, but by the time he reached her side, she was already dead. An autopsy determined that subject 05 died of a cerebral hemorrhage with no clear physical cause, though it appears that the attempt to remove the nail is what killed her. The research team decided to take a break from human trials and take a closer look at the physical properties of the nail itself. What weaknesses did it have? Could it be destroyed? Subject 09 was given the nail and a collection of tools, then instructed to go to town on the object and attempt to destroy it. 09 placed the nail in a vise and attempted to go at it with an angle grinder. As soon as the grinder touched the nail, 09 fell to the ground seizing and speaking in tongues, hands pressed to his temples. 30 seconds later, he was dead from the same kind of cerebral hemorrhage that killed subject 05. Examination of the nail revealed a small amount of surface damage, showing that the nail likely can be destroyed, but is somehow able to defend itself against destruction. Regular human trials were resumed the next day, and Subject 10 was brought into the test facility. There, one stadium light was placed on a computer-controlled track, allowing the light to be shifted incrementally from a remote point outside of the room. The light was set up to cast a long shadow, and the nail was dropped into the shadow's head. Immediately, Subject 10 was unable to walk away from the nail, in keeping with the standard effects of SCP-272. Then the light was slowly raised, moving the shadow. The subject was dragged along as the shadow moved, as if yanked by his feet. He stumbled and had to work to regain his balance. Then the light was moved quickly. Again, the subject was dragged along with the motion of the shadow. However, due to the rapid pace of the light's motion, he was unable to keep his balance and fell to the floor, receiving scrapes, bruises, and mild road rash. Finally, in an attempt to see what might happen if the subject was unable to move even against his will, 10 was restrained. His feet were chained to the floor and a chicken wire screen was placed between him and the nail. Then the light was moved again. To the horror of the research team watching, these restraints did nothing to lessen the nail's hold on the subject. He was pulled forward violently, and the chains ripped from the floor and his body slowly forced itself through the chicken wire, landing on the other side in a pile of tiny pieces, like a potato shot through a tennis racket. No matter what is holding them down or what is in their way, a subject cannot escape the pull of their shadow or the prison of the nail. They will be bound to it, even if it kills them. Testing was temporarily suspended while a cleaning crew attended to the room, taking the rest of the day to get the bloodstains out of the concrete. The final experiment on record was conducted the following day. Subject D-272-04 was placed in the center of the room, with one stadium light casting his shadow at a 45-degree angle. The nail was dropped onto 04's shadow and he was held in place. Then the research team simply waited. Food and water was provided every few hours, as well as a bucket to use as a bathroom. For the first 2 days, the subject seemed relatively normal, if exhausted and upset. On the third day, he did not respond to food or water when it was offered. After a week had passed, the subject began to speak in rapid manic screams of what was determined to be a dead language. By day 11, the subject was switching back and forth between bursts of intense ranting and a catatonic state. Finally, after 14 days pinned to the spot by the nail, Subject 04 was set free. As soon as the nail was removed, they began speaking English again. They were severely malnourished and visibly traumatized, but immediately began to recover once freed from the nail's hold. Portions of the subject's rants were recorded and translated by Dr. Kimuro, who attempted to interview the subject on the 14th day of the study. At one point, the subject said,
"I cannot sleep. The screams are heard. I am not warm. The shadow steals."
When asked how he was feeling, the subject began to tear at the skin on his arms and shout,
"I am the prisoner of my own foolishness. Let my flesh crumble like the apple whose ashes burn at my tongue."
Not the most cheerful thing to hear, but not too out of the ordinary for a day's work at the SCP Foundation either. Following this experiment, human experimentation with SCP-272 was suspended until further notice. SCP-272 is kept in a small wooden box, hidden in a vault at Sector 25. Because nothing happens to the object as long as it is left alone, no further containment procedures are considered necessary. When the nails were moved from containment for experimentation, staff have been instructed to take extra care not to drop it. SCP-272 is considered a safe-class SCP due to its inability to act on its own. It does not appear to do anything when left alone. However, there is clearly a great deal more to that little nail than meets the eye. Somehow, it is able to wreak psychic havoc on those it traps, and on anyone who might try to harm it. The more we learn about the nature of SCP-272, the more questions crop up. Where did it come from? How does it get inside people's heads? What did Subject 04 mean by the shadow steals? We may never know. But if you find yourself picking up any strange nails one of these days, make sure you don't drop them.
In 1961, the SCP Foundation discovered a town that was completely devoid of all life. Not long before their arrival, Darrington, North Carolina had been a community with high aspirations, a deeply religious township of devout Christians, many of whom were seeking greater prosperity from their lives. But now their home was a ghost town, with no sign of any prior Darrington resident to be found. Where in the hell had they all gone? It hardly seemed like the population of an entire town would all simultaneously decide to up sticks and leave to pastures new. But then again, maybe the citizens of Darrington hadn't left at all. Perhaps they weren't even really still human and had taken up residence somewhere much darker, like underground. This is the story of one of the earliest known instances of a phenomenon now known under the designation of SCP-3089, or to use its alternative name, that old-time religion. When the SCP Foundation arrived in a desolate Darrington to find the townsfolk had all vanished, they immediately began an investigation into the exact hows and whys, the answers to what exactly had happened here. After all, while not a huge place, Darrington was home to nearly 1,000 residents, and that many people don't just disappear, if they even had disappeared and weren't just dormant. But what the Foundation uncovered was a gruesome discovery that led them to not only demolishing the entire North Carolinian town, but purchasing all the land around it to keep the area under permanent observation. Prior to the demolition, however, the Ministry of Sevenfold Blessing had been one of the oldest buildings in Darrington, much like most town churches. And it was while searching the offices of this church that the Foundation cleanup crews discovered their first piece of evidence, the initial clue about what had happened to this deserted town. They recovered a series of cassette tapes, each with a recording of sermons that had been given within the Ministry of Sevenfold Blessing. These were all delivered by one Pastor Bartholomew Jenner, the first having been recorded on August 17th of 1959, 2 years earlier. My friends, I want to talk to you about what the Bible offers tonight, Pastor Jenner began in the first of these recordings. I want to talk to you about what you are owed. I want to talk to you to those of you who are struggling right now. To those of you who have hardship and pain. Maybe you've heard that the Bible only nourishes the spirit, that God only provides for our immortal souls. Well, my friends, I'm here to tell you that this is simply not true. Pastor Bartholomew Jenner seemed to be focused on the discussion of very real, relatable problems. After all, what person hasn't felt unsatisfied with their life at one point or another? And this was apparently no different for the people of Darrington. Many of you can think of places in your lives where you have not yet risen, where you are not yet victorious. Marriage, finances, health. But do not fret, my friends, God wants you to rise. He has cleared a path for you. It is one littered with his earthly treasures. To claim them, you only need to shed your old selves and be reborn. The pastor was merely using the shared faith of the township to help reaffirm that their struggles were not the be-all end-all of their lives. Or at least, that's how it first appeared. But the religious practices taking place in this first recording would soon take a bizarre turn, making it clear there was something far more sinister, even cult-like, going on in the ministry of sevenfold blessing. Now, if you would, some of the ladies from the mayor's office were kind enough to collect these cicada shells. Pass along, each of you take one. Yes, the children too. Be careful, very careful. They are fragile. Each of you take one and hold it in your left hand. Yes, the left hand, not the right. Your left. The shells of dead cicadas hardly seemed like common fare for a sermon like this. Although as the recording continued, it was easy to understand that Pastor Jenner intended these discarded insect carapaces to be something of a metaphor, even if they were pretty gross, especially to some of the younger members of his congregation. He explained to the Darrington residents that these cicada shells were meant to be symbolic of whatever hardship the citizens were currently struggling with in their lives, whether it was work, a marriage, or an ill family member. Then came the next part of this unorthodox practice. The pastor instructed everyone in the congregation to picture themselves holding their biggest problem in their left hand. Now I want you to squeeze your left hand. Squeeze it into a fist. Feel that problem cracking like old dried out paper. Feel it crumble to dust. Jenner told them, and the residents of Darrington did so, crushing the cicada shells until there was nothing left. Everyone open your eyes. Don't you feel better? Stronger. This is what is offered. Our hardships are like the shell. We shall cast them aside even as they crumble. God has cleared a path. Needless to say, the Foundation agents that recovered the tapes of Pastor Jenner's odd sermons weren't exactly sure what to make of them. And as unusual as they were, the recordings did little to indicate where the townspeople of Darrington, North Carolina had disappeared to. But as they listened further, what they found was even more unsettling than an entire congregation of people crushing cicada shells. In the second recording, dated December 19th of 1959, Pastor Jenner was once again presiding over his congregation. He had just finished quoting a passage from Matthew chapter 25, verse 30, which related to a biblical tale known as the Parable of the Talents. In this story, a master puts his servants in charge of a differently sized portion of his wealth while he is away, then judges them based on whether or not his servants make a profit using his money. The third servant, who had received the least talents, meaning an amount of money, was punished for burying his share in the ground. Cast out into the outer darkness, to face weeping and gnashing of teeth. It was after making mention of this unprofitable servant that Pastor Jenner went on to address even more of the bizarre, almost ritualistic practices he had been introducing to his sermons. Now, some of you have expressed concerns over the new sacraments. A few have even called them sacrilege. And yet, have we not prospered? Have these same naysayers, these same doubting Thomases, not profited from our good works? The pastor declared, I have shown you how to heal the sick with the Lord's Prayer and the blood of an unbaptized child. I have shown you how to see your future in the stemming entrails of a quivering crow. I have shown you the path to glory. But I cannot make you follow this path. I can only show it to you. It is you and you alone who must follow it, who must rise and shed your old self. Shed your old self. The words immediately called to mind the image of the cicadas, insects that discard their outer carapaces and emerge anew, bugs that also burrow into the ground and wait, lying dormant under the earth for years at a time, all before they emerge, rising up again so they can spread. It was becoming clear that Pastor Jenner was certainly deviating further and further from the church's normal religious practices. His bold and blatant descriptions of what sounded like ritualistic sacrifices were shocking enough to hear, speaking of using blood and entrails to bring the town the prosperity it sought. But if that wasn't bad enough, the worst was still yet to come, contained within the third and final recording. Unlike the previous cassettes, most of the sermon from June 7, 1960 was almost completely unintelligible, and without any visual evidence to go along with it, it was hard for the Foundation to make out exactly what was going on. It began with another quote from Matthew, this time chapter 28, verse 6, which made mention of the resurrection of Jesus, that he had risen, and that people should come and see where the Lord lay. Not a metaphor, my friends, Pastor Jenner explained before urging his congregation to join in some kind of formation. Step forward, mothers behind their daughters, fathers behind their sons. Turn to face the recording became unintelligible again after that point, with only a few more words being audible. The pastor seemed to have gathered the townsfolk of Darrington, presumably for some new form of ritual. He encouraged the town's children to close their eyes and pray, before reminding the congregation that God sacrificed the life of his only son, Jesus. Frighteningly, it appeared that Pastor Jenner was implying the adults of Darrington should do the same. One of the next fragments of his sermon that could be deciphered declared, "Lamb is slaughtered to feed the lion, the son is slaughtered to feed." Between more and more noise interfering with the recording, Pastor Jenner could be heard saying, "The pact is complete. This world shall be our paradise," before he encouraged his congregation, or those who were left, to dig deep and wait. Then came perhaps the most horrifying part of the tape. The remainder of the recording lasted 30 minutes, comprised of pure static. Or the Foundation agents listening to it assumed at first that it was just interference, but further audio analysis seemed to suggest that the long, continuous mass of hissing wasn't static at all. It was the chittering sound of insects, like the noise made by cicadas. For a time, the incident at Darrington left the Foundation baffled. There seemed to be no clear answer as to what had happened. Not one of the town's residents were anywhere to be found, and on top of that, there were no bodies, no remains of any kind to speak of. If they were dead, there would at least be some kind of trace. And then there were all the questions raised by Pastor Bartholomew Jenner's strange sermons. Why did he seem so focused on enacting rituals? Did any of his methods really benefit the town? And why did he place so much emphasis on cicadas, of all things? Answers were few and far between. Although almost 6 decades after the Foundation discovered the desolate town of Darrington, a new development would come to light. To be more accurate, it was 56 years later. On the 11th of January 2017, a Foundation agent named Daniel Mitchell was patrolling the area that had formerly been Darrington, North Carolina, before the Foundation had demolished all traces of the town. By this point, the SCP Foundation had long thought that they had figured out exactly what SCP-3089 was. They had even encountered it emerging in a number of different forms in both 2007 and 2015. However, it was what Daniel Mitchell happened across during the routine monthly patrol that revealed the horrifying truth. At the outskirts of the area where the town had once been, a series of sinkholes had opened up at some point between the previous monthly check and this one in early 2017. And if you think that these sinkholes caused a disturbance in the earth and uncovered all the bodies of the former residents of Darrington, you'd be wrong. It was far, far stranger. The Foundation conducted a full-scale examination of the sinkholes around the demolished North Carolinian town. And these weren't just a few patches of loose ground that had sunk through. The geological survey the Foundation carried out quickly revealed that these sinkholes led to an extensive network of tunnels underground. They extended several hundred kilometers outwards, practically covering the entire underside of where Darrington had been. The tunnels seemed far too big than any other created by any natural means, but the entire network also appeared too rudimentary, too imperfect to have been carved using any modern excavation technology, like a large drill. Plus, if any equipment like that had been on site, the Foundation would have noticed, as they kept the area monitored. It was almost like something had been burrowing through the ground, only to eventually crawl back up to the surface, resulting in the sinkholes. What's more, the Foundation's geological tests suggested that the network of tunnels was almost 4 decades old. That would have placed the date of their creation about 10 years after the disappearance of everyone in Darrington. Naturally, the Foundation immediately launched a mission to explore more of the tunnels. Before even completing a full sweep of the underground space in its entirety, they had made another discovery. Contained within the tunnels was over a whole ton of organic material that had been mostly preserved without decomposing too much. The SCP Foundation began gathering samples for testing, finding most of this material to be severely desiccated dermis tissue. That is the dense layer of skin beneath the epidermis, and it had all been entirely dried out. But that wasn't all the testing uncovered. According to genetic analysis, the tissue had 2 distinct types of DNA present. The first being easily identified as human genetic material, which made sense. Despite the material lacking in moisture, the dermis tissue didn't match the skin of any other mammal. But then there was the other DNA present. Combined with the expected human DNA was the presence of something else that the Foundation researchers had quite some difficulty finding a match for. Eventually, they determined that this genetic material entangled with the human DNA belonged to the Cicadata montana, better known as the New Forest cicada. Cicadas, again. Cicada DNA mixed with human DNA, discovered in a large network of underground tunnels, all beneath the same town where a pastor had his congregation crush cicada shells in their left hands during one of his sermons. 10 years before the sinkhole incident, the Foundation was alerted to a particular YouTube channel by the name of Kai Sanchez Positively Rich. On the surface, Kai was one of the many online grifters preaching about how easy it was to quickly achieve an obscene amount of wealth by simply believing in yourself. Usually, if not always, these types of people were trying to scam their audience of loyal subscribers into investing in some kind of illicit money-making scheme or any number of other cons, promising their followers easy money that never came. But Kai Sanchez's channel was slightly different, so much so that the Foundation had to contain his entire audience, deeming them to have been affected by SCP-3089. The video that caught the Foundation's attention was an hour-long upload from Kai, entitled 7 Secrets to Ascend the Ladder of Prosperity. There was that word again, prosperity. The same thing Pastor Jenner had promised his entire congregation in Darrington. And the similarities didn't end there. In his video, much like the pastor during his sermons, Kai Sanchez encouraged his audience to visualize their success in order to achieve it. He implied that the human consciousness could impact reality. For example, if his viewers just imagined themselves having a bigger bank account or looking more attractive, then these things would manifest themselves into the real world. One of Kai's secrets to ascend the ladder of prosperity was as follows.
Visualize your ascendance. Reimagine yourself as someone who can reach the top of that ladder. Shed your old identity, tear it off, throw it aside like dead skin. You won't need it, not where you're going.
The resemblance to Pastor Jenner's sermons was uncanny. Kai's video even encouraged that his audience leave scraps out to lure stray cats into their homes, and then, once they had one, to take a knife and, well, you remember what happened in Darrington. But Kai Sanchez made sure to specify,
remember to hold the knife with your left hand.
Another online community was tagged by the Foundation for similar teachings. This group of insular men were trying to apply the same methodology primarily to attract women. However, they also reasoned it could be used to improve their own financial status and physical stature, all done through visualizing and believing that doing so would make these things improve, that having faith would grant them prosperity. This disturbed community even tried to use bug rattlers to emit frequencies to aid in attracting women. Contained within these rattlers were the preserved remains of cicadas. Male cicadas have tymbals, structures on their outer shell that emit a loud hissing, chittering noise that they often use to find a mate after spending so much time dormant underground before burrowing up to the surface. And if you've been paying attention, you might be able to guess exactly where this is going. SCP-3089 is a phenomenon that occurs within communities of people who are seeking some form of prosperity. Whether that community be a town, a group of like-minded people online, or any other group of collected individuals. The particular type of prosperity these people are all seeking can be anything from spiritual enlightenment to financial success. The SCP Foundation does not yet quite understand exactly how SCP-3089 starts, only that the communities affected by it will attempt to achieve their chosen material success through the application of rituals, like visualizing what they hope to overcome and achieve, and practicing sacrifices. In short, these people have to believe these acts will grant them what they want. They need to be willing to go far enough to do unspeakable things. They need to have faith. Although what they don't realize is, some things can feed on that faith. They can harvest it. Before these communities realize the terrible things that they have done, or who exactly has tricked them into performing these rituals, they'll begin to undergo a horrific transformation process, known as SCP-3089-B. It begins in the chrysalis stage. Members of a community that have been affected by SCP-3089 will experience a declined state of metabolism, now classified as an instance of SCP-3089-A. Their brain activity, heart rate, and body temperature will all begin to lower. Over a period of between 3 and 6 hours, these people will then suffer a change to their epidermis, the outer layer of skin. It starts to harden until it has formed a dense, brittle substance, like a shell. Next comes the second stage of SCP-3089-B, metamorphosis. Internally, SCP-3089-A individuals will develop a number of tetromas, a type of germ cell tumor that can contain several different types of tissue, such as hair, muscle, and bone. During the next 2 or 3 weeks, these tumors will expand and dissolve the person's soft tissue. Then there's the final stage, emergence. An instance of SCP-3089-A will exit its dormant state that began in the initial stage. Once they have awoken, then something exits the outer epidermal shell. It will not communicate. Some will retain remnants of internal organs, such as eyes or lungs. However, these are vestigial, no longer serving any purpose. The brain functions deviate from any normal human patterns. Having completed the process, this thing will attempt to burrow down into the soil via any means at its disposal. An outer shell, digging into the soil. The tunnels underneath Darrington. The genetic material uncovered below. Dermis tissue with 2 types of DNA, a mix of human and cicada. There is something out there. It is preying on people's faith, their longing for prosperity. Then when these communities are presented with someone who can take advantage of that faith, like Pastor Jenner or Kai Sanchez, they find themselves encouraged to push their faith to its furthest limit. And then they are rewarded by becoming something else, something nightmarish. The question is, when they wake up and crawl back out from their tunnels, leaving a sinkhole in their wake, where do these cicada creatures go?
The fabric of our world is littered with strange doorways if you know where to look for them. Tears, portals, anomalies, all leading to places and planes beyond human imagining and understanding. And SCP-2317, otherwise known as a door to another world, certainly fits that description. Contained and kept at all times under the watch of armed guards, SCP-2317 appears to be a simple and unsuspecting wooden door in its frame. It hardly looks like it requires such extreme round-the-clock security, or needs a strange, secretive ritual that the Foundation performs, presumably to keep the door closed. But of course, sometimes the most interesting thing about a closed doorway isn't where it leads, it's what it keeps out. Even by the Foundation's already high standards, the requirements and regulations for personnel who are assigned to SCP-2317 seem oddly specific. Psychological testing is standard practice to work for the Foundation, but an additional hurdle that anyone has to clear before even getting to glimpse at this unassuming wooden door is having a score of at least 72 on the Milgram Obedience Examination. It is also mandatory that personnel assigned to maintaining it are both unmarried, with no children or next of kin, as well as an unwavering, unquestioning loyalty to the Foundation, pure devotion to its code and objectives. These may seem like strange requirements. After all, SCP-2317 is just a door, isn't it? Perhaps there's a reason that the Foundation keeps so much of the information about SCP-2317 buried deep under layers upon layers of security, with only the Overseer Council privy to the full details of its strange nature. Knowledge, as they say, is power. But maybe knowing too much about whatever is behind that door can prove deadly. Still, if SCP-2317 is a door to another world, an alternate dimension, or parallel reality, it must be safe enough to visit. After all, the Foundation has been sending personnel in there on a regular basis. Daily, in fact. According to the O5 Council, this is done as part of a procedure to maintain active containment of something lurking beyond that old wooden doorframe. But what could possibly warrant such constant maintenance and surveillance? In accordance with the Foundation's guidelines, all staff are required to rotate out of observing SCP-2317 after every 2 months, and spend the following 3rd month in full psychological counseling, before they are permitted to return to the containment unit housing the door to another world. It was after one of these month-long periods of evaluation that a Foundation guard was informed that his security clearance has been raised to level 3, and that he'd been selected for the duty of carrying out 220 Calabasas. He knew the name instantly. This was the title given to the daily containment procedure that absolutely had to be carried out. The guard didn't question these orders. After all, he'd been selected precisely because of his loyalty to the Foundation. He did make one request to his commanding officer, however. He wanted to know what had happened to the last guard that had performed the procedure.
Didn't make it out of psychological evaluation,
the officer replied. Not letting this affect his dedication, the guard was told to prepare for Procedure 220 Calabasas, along with a fellow member of Foundation security personnel. The guard was instructed to gather everything on a strange list. The first was a pre-selected member of Class D personnel, specifically a convicted murderer. Class D refers to disposable class personnel, expendable individuals recruited by the Foundation for the sole purpose of testing SCPs. Class Ds were usually prison inmates repurposed for SCP testing, and the one chosen for 220 Calabasas was no exception, serving multiple life sentences for murders, or at least that's what the guard had been told. A Foundation personnel member instructed him to refer to the Class Ds solely as the assistant from that point on. Next, the guard collected a live chicken, an obsidian-edged knife, a silver aspergillum and aspersorium, to be filled with 500 cc's of holy water that have been blessed by a priest of the Abrahamic faith, and finally, a 1 kiloton nuclear device, which according to instructions was only to be detonated in the unlikely event of a catastrophic containment failure. In other words, the last resort. After following his instructions to the letter and without question, the guard and his colleague were briefed. The Foundation personnel member informed them that he'd be joining and leading them in the procedure. The staff member also specified that henceforth he'd be referred to as the Celebrant until the completion of 220 Calabasas. The guard was acutely aware of how specific these instructions were, but trusted in the Foundation, knowing that if they wanted this procedure performed a certain way, then it was in everyone's best interest to carry out the orders to the letter. But what the Celebrant then went on to explain raised far more questions about SCP-2317 and the nature of Procedure 220 Calabasas. The Class D joining them wasn't actually a Class D. The assistant, as they were now referred to, was in reality another Foundation staff member, with a Level 4 security clearance specifically tailored to SCP-2317. Every member of staff entering through SCP-2317 and taking an active role in 22 Calabasas needed to be informed that this assistant was not to be harmed or treated as a member of disposable class. Fighting back the nagging question of why the Foundation would employ this subterfuge, the guard, along with his fellow security officer, the Celebrant, and assistant, prepared for their departure through the door to another world at solar noon, when the sun was highest over SCP-2317. Solar noon, chickens, and holy water. This all seemed like an oddly occult combination for the Foundation. As they entered the old wooden door, beyond lay a barren salt plain, stretching out for kilometers in every direction. This alternate dimension, according to the briefing, was designated SCP-2317 Prime. The guard immediately noticed a ring of 7 pillars directly ahead of the group as they entered. each of them bearing intricately detailed engravings unlike anything from any era of ancient history. Procedure 220 Calabasas was carried out quickly but carefully, the guard watching as the celebrant and assistant were careful not to miss a step. First, the celebrant scattered holy water into the center of the pillars with the aspergillum and aspersorium, looking down at his feet and keeping a steady pace as he stepped counterclockwise around them. The guard watched intently as the celebrant completed his circuit around the pillars and turned to the assistant, anointing his head with holy water.
7 seals, 7 rings, 7 thrones for the Scarlet King, he said aloud.
The assistant, with the obsidian blade in his hand, took the chicken and dispatched it in sacrifice, letting its blood mix with the holy water. He then repeated the celebrant's circuit in the opposite direction before stepping into the center of the stone pillars.
Blood for the old gods, water for the new king,
the assistant recited, pouring the remaining mix of blood and holy water over a patch of salt in the middle of the 7 pillars. Even though he knew it wasn't his place to question the Foundation, as the 220 Calabasas procedure took place, the guard couldn't help but wonder what all this was for. It seemed so ritualistic, like something deeply religious or even magical. He never bought into all that occult mumbo-jumbo, even while working for the Foundation. But he had learned not to question anything, even the strangest and most inexplicable of sights. Little did he know that beneath his feet was an ancient and unknowable horror, a beast chained and lying in wait. Contained in a chamber directly underneath the pillars sat an impossibly large creature. Humanoid and obese, its body covered entirely in scales thicker than armor plating. Branch-like horns protruded from its jawless head, pointing up to chains that hung from the 7 pillars above, each one hooked into the entity's back. All but one of the chains was broken, a final withering shackle keeping the Devourer of Worlds in its underground prison. Ever since 1894 BCE, when Erexian mystics imprisoned it, the Devourer has been waiting patiently for its inevitable freedom. It knows, as well as the Foundation, that nothing can be done to prevent the final chain from one day breaking. Even Procedure 220 Calabasas won't keep the creature contained. It's nothing more than a smokescreen, an act designed to create an illusion of active containment and maintain Foundation morale until a permanent solution can be devised to keep SCP-2317 imprisoned. Of course, if the guard had known this, it would have also explained the need for a 1-kiloton nuclear device as part of this staged ritual. Procedure 220 Calabasas had all the components to trick everyone below the O5 Council, emulating religious and occult rituals, the increased level of security surrounding the procedure and its purpose, and telling staff that any failure to correctly and completely perform the 220 Calabasas procedure will result in an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. All these elements work together to conceal the truth that one day the Devourer will escape and lay waste to our dimension. Knowledge is power, and maybe knowing too much truly is deadly. Perhaps if the guard had learned any of this, he'd have understood why his predecessor never made it out of psychological evaluation. Maybe if he had questioned the purpose of Procedure 220 Calabasas, he'd have learned the true nature of SCP-2317 and what that doorway kept out. But he was loyal to the Foundation through and through. As the team finished performing 220 Calabasas and returned through the wooden door, the guard took one last glance over his shoulder at the vast salt plain. The entire dimension was calm, silent, but not peaceful. It was patient. The entity had waited centuries for its time, and now all it would take was the breaking of this 7th and final chain. One day. The door was closed behind the guard as he, the celebrant, the assistant, and his fellow security officers stepped back through. Their work done and, as far as they knew, preventing catastrophe for another day. Only the Foundation higher-ups, the Overseer Council, are aware of the true danger posed by SCP-2317 and its sole inhabitant. Current predictions are that at some point within the next 30 years, the Devourer of Worlds will be freed. Any and all attempts to repair or recreate the chains holding it in place have so far failed. As such, the O5 Council has elected to continue providing Foundation personnel with the ignorant hope that Procedure 220 Calabasas is an effective strategy for containment. As we've said, sometimes the most interesting thing about a closed door isn't where it leads, it's what it keeps out. In the case of SCP-2317, the unassuming wooden door holds at bay an ancient creature of untold power that will one day break free and wreak havoc in our dimension. Nothing the Foundation does can prevent it, or keep it contained behind the door to another world. And only the Overseer Council knows that any and all efforts to do so are futile. With all that in mind, we can only hope that the doorway of SCP-2317 stays closed, at least for a little while longer.
On an ordinary day in 1991, a young man known by the initials JS went on a hike with 4 of his friends on the wooded outskirts of their small town. Everything seemed perfectly normal until JS began to feel a strange sense of familiarity, like he had been in this spot before. He couldn't shake this weird feeling, but thought nothing more of it. Little did he know that this was a sign of deadly things to come. Several hours after first experiencing that sense of deja vu, JS was found by the side of the road, covered in cuts and scratches, with his friends nowhere to be found. This is the story of SCP-939, an unforgettable monster that you'll never remember. There was no way for JS to know that the unsettling feeling he felt and the horrors that followed it were the result of an experiment conducted by the SCP Foundation, an experiment with deadly unforeseen consequences. JS and his friends were exposed to a substance known only as AMN-C227 as part of a series of tests performed by the SCP Foundation, intended to determine the effectiveness of this substance as a deliberate amnestic. Dealing with as many mysterious, secret creatures and objects as they do, the SCP Foundation has long needed a way to tamper with the memories of those exposed to the Foundation's various prisoners and test subjects. And when the Foundation discovered AMN-C227, it seemed like it might be perfect for this purpose. So where did AMN-C227 come from? Over a year before the incident with JS and his friends, the SCP Foundation captured SCP-939. SCP-939 is a species of endothermic predators that live and hunt in packs. They are designated Keter class and regarded as highly dangerous and hostile to human life. Native to caves, they have no eyes, translucent red skin, and stand at an average of 2.2 meters tall, with an average weight of 250 kilograms. They have 4 limbs, each ending in 3-fingered claws and a 4th opposable digit resembling a thumb. In addition to their sharp claws, their mouths are filled with red fang-like teeth that reach up to 6 centimeters in length. In place of their absent eyes, they have light-sensitive spots running along their backs, which are covered in spines believed to detect changes in air pressure and flow. In addition to their many other terrifying attributes, the internal anatomy of SCP-939 poses a biological mystery. These creatures have no circulatory system and no digestive tract. That's right, in spite of being predators seemingly acting on a need to feed, they have no stomach. Instead, when they eat, their food builds up in their respiratory system until its presence inhibits function, and then it is regurgitated. In spite of being a creature that should not, under any logical conditions, be able to live, SCP-939 continues to persist, and is even capable of giving birth to live young after a gestation period of 12 months. The SCP Foundation was able to study a litter of these young that were born in captivity in September of 1992, though the creatures remain just as much of a scientific mystery as they were upon first discovery. Everything about them seems to defy the logic of the natural world, which, to be fair, is really nothing new for the Foundation. The respiratory system of SCP-939 was found to exhale small traces of an airborne amnestic substance, given the name AMN-C227. This compound blocks the formation of memories for the duration of exposure to it, plus a 30-minute period following the exposure, give or take a few minutes. It is colorless, odorless, tasteless,
and completely undetectable in the bloodstream after only 60 minutes. AMN-C227 was approved for use as a Class C amnestic by the SCP Foundation in 1990 following some initial tests. However, after one particular incident involving a young man and his friends, the official use of AMN-C227 was suspended. JS and 3 of his 4 friends were previously given a dose of AMN-C227, though the details of why they were given the amnestic has since been stricken from the record. Several months after being exposed to AMN-C227, JS and his friends went out on their ill-fated hiking trip. While hiking, JS was suddenly overcome with a sense of déjà vu. When he mentioned it to his friends, 3 of them agreed that they had felt it too. One of the group, another young man who had not been exposed to AMN-C227, was uncomfortable and decided to go home. JS and the remaining 3 members of the group made the choice to stay in the woods and try to determine what was triggering the unusual feeling of familiarity. As they got closer and closer to a large cave near the hiking trail, the sense of having been there before grew stronger and stronger. Armed with only one flashlight and a foolish curiosity, the 4 went inside the cave. They made their way deeper and deeper and deeper into the darkness, not knowing why they felt this way or what they might find inside. None of the group could explain just what felt so familiar, only that the further they made their way into the cave, the more pronounced the feeling became. It was getting late, and they knew they should have been afraid to venture so deep into a cave with only one light source and no knowledge of what lay inside. But still, they pressed on. One of the group remarked that they should turn back, but the others refused to listen. They wanted to know what they were getting close to, what was drawing them deeper and deeper into the cave. Unfortunately for them, they would get their answer. In the heart of the cave was a pack of SCP-939, waiting patiently for their prey to wander into their domain. There are no witnesses to account for what exactly happened to JS and his companions, but we can reasonably piece the events together from what happened after. Once the friends reached the heart of the cave, the creatures were on them in seconds, raking them with their sharp claws and biting with their fangs. SCP-939 are larger and stronger than most people, so it was probably not much of a fight. However, while his friends were being devoured, JS was somehow able to scramble out of the cave and make his way into the woods in search of help. Under the influence of the AMN-C227 that had built up in the cave from the presence of the pack of SCP-939, JS lost a large portion of his memory of the event. He found himself on the side of the highway late at night, seriously injured and his clothes ripped. An officer found him there and asked him to stay still and remain calm until an ambulance could arrive. JS was still in a panic and attempted to run away from the officer, begging to be released so that he could get away. He babbled incoherently about the color red, screaming over and over again about the red, though when prompted, he could not explain what the red he was screaming about referred to. His friends were not with him. Just as the officer managed to calm JS, the ambulance arrived. Its flashing red lights sent him into another frenzy, and he attempted to escape custody, claiming that the red lights were going to get him. The official police report described JS as perhaps being under the influence of a powerful hallucinogen, that he was just having a bad trip, but the SCP Foundation knew better. The Foundation conducted an interview with JS about his experience, and determined that SCP-939 was certainly involved. As part of their cover-up effort, they strongly implicated JS in the disappearance and the death of his friends. He was convicted of manslaughter, though the bodies of his friends were never found. It is rumored that the SCP Foundation hired him on a prison work release program, and that he now works as a member of the janitorial staff at one of the Foundation's facilities. This incident led to the suspension of the use of AMN-C227, as it revealed some vital and disturbing information about the compound's side effects. After the exposure to AMN-C227, a person who found themselves exposed to it again would experience a sense of familiarity and felt compelled to investigate the source of this feeling. Essentially, anyone treated with AMN-C227 are not made aware of the existence and danger of SCP-939 would become a perfect victim, primed to be attracted to dens of SCP-939. It is likely that this side effect is not a coincidence, but rather a deliberate hunting tactic designed to attract prey that had somehow managed to escape. With no memory of their attack at the hands of SCP-939, this previous intended prey would find themselves drawn to the same den or even a new one, not knowing that they were walking back into near certain death. While the SCP Foundation suspended the use of AMN-C227 as a Class C amnestic, they did recruit a team of SCP field operatives to take advantage of this side effect. This team of operatives were deliberately administered a dose of AMN-C227 and briefed on its effects, as well as the dangers of following the feeling of déjà vu should it surface in the field. These infected officers were essentially used as bloodhounds, relying on any sense of unusual familiarity to sniff out new dens of SCP-939 so they could be captured and contained by the Foundation. As far as we know, this operation is still ongoing today. However, now that the Foundation has a sufficient number of specimens to study, additional dens of SCP-939 that are discovered are ordered to be immediately destroyed. As for the SCP-939 still in captivity, they are contained in environmentally regulated and negatively pressured cells with walls of reinforced concrete. The doors to the cells are airtight to prevent the leakage of any AMN-C227. And any personnel that interact with one of the creatures is required to wear level C hazmat gear to avoid exposure and follow decontamination procedures upon exiting the cell. All SCP-939 have subdermal tracking devices implanted to find them in the event of escape. Only one SCP-939 has given birth in the time that the creatures have been in captivity. Strangely, SCP-939 young look indistinguishable from human infants and change their physical appearance at some yet unknown point as they age. If any more offspring are produced, they will immediately be separated from the parent and studied. All that we know is that they are found in caves in the woods outside of a small town. It could be any town, even yours. So, if you're ever out hiking and struck with a sudden feeling of déjà vu, don't investigate. Don't get curious. Just go home. It might just save your life.
In a remote part of Russia, a mysterious disease outbreak was tearing through a tiny farming village with terrifying side effects. There was no cure, no clue to where it came from, and worst of all, the disease's terrifying impact didn't end with death. No, it was after those carrying the disease died that the real horrors started. After an agonizing fever that leaves the victims writhing in pain, they quickly succumb to the disease, only to rise from their graves to wreak havoc on the living. The virus continues to spread until the corpses outnumber those trying to hide from them, as the world spirals into almost certain ruin. It sounds like the plot of a zombie movie, but for the SCP Foundation, this is anything but fiction. And the terror that unfolded in that little Siberian town is the first recorded encounter with SCP-610, also known as the Flesh That Hates. First, livestock began to vanish from farms. Theft or wild animals were suspected, but no suspects could be found, and no mutilated remains turned up. The animals weren't being stolen, and they weren't being eaten, so what happened to them? With no more animals left to lose, the farmers themselves then began to disappear. But the authorities refused to take the missing persons cases seriously. The missing farmers' families would contact the police, make a report, and then the whole thing was forgotten. It was written off just as another unsolved disappearance, which wasn't uncommon in the wild and unforgiving region. Then, the police themselves began to disappear. The families of the missing farmers would sometimes report strange sounds from the surrounding woods, describing moans and inhuman screeches of pain. One young boy reported seeing a cow with what he described as tentacles lurking around the edge of the trees. Regional police were dispatched to the location and ordered to investigate and report back on their findings within 24 hours. But the units sent to the area didn't report back and were never heard from again. Upon learning of the reports, the Russian government grew increasingly concerned, fearing domestic insurgency or foreign espionage of some kind could be at play. They sent a small team of special agents to the area, and one by one, those agents disappeared, just like the others before them. It seemed no one who went into the village after the disappearances started ever came out again. They had all simply vanished. Desperate for answers, the Russian government contacted the only people in the world who could help: the SCP Foundation. What the Foundation found over the course of their investigation would shock and unnerve them, going beyond anything they had previously discovered. Before the investigation officially began, the affected area was sealed off by the Russian government. Not knowing if it would be safe to send researchers into the containment perimeter, the Foundation set up a small camera-mounted unit, nicknamed Herbie, to capture footage of whatever remained of the village. The images captured by Herbie revealed what exactly had become of the people in this doomed village, and the true nightmarish nature of SCP-610.
SCP-610 is a Keter-class entity, meaning it's an anomaly that's exceedingly difficult to contain consistently or reliably, with containment procedures often being extensive and complex. 610 is a highly contagious skin disease that initially manifests like an ordinary allergic reaction, with symptoms including increased sensitivity, itching, and a rash. But within just 3 hours of those initial symptoms appearing, the rash starts to turn into masses of scar tissue on the chest and arms. These masses spread over the legs and back of the victim and completely consume them in thick, rubbery flesh within 5 hours. Once they're covered, the victim will cease all vital functions. Unfortunately for them, and doubly so for those around them, they do not stay dead. About 3 minutes after expiring, the victim's vitals will restart at a heightened rate, and the masses of flesh encasing their body will begin to move and multiply, mutating them into a form beyond anything resembling the human they once were. The specific type of mutation varies from case to case, but has included the head becoming massive and bulbous, the growth of extra limbs, and, in especially gruesome cases, the victim's body splitting apart to allow extra tendrils of flesh to sprout from the open wound. Occasionally, an infected person will stop moving and become rooted to the ground in a set location. Once it is settled, their flesh will spread itself across the ground, encasing all nearby objects in flaps of scar tissue. The infected that maintain their mobility are highly aggressive, even violent, and will attempt to infect any living thing that comes into their line of sight. The disease does not only infect humans, and can take over any living organism within a matter of hours. Due to the highly contagious and dangerous nature of the disease, safe observation of infected specimens and areas is only possible with drones and mounted cameras. This brings us back to Herbie, the first such mounted camera to record footage of the infected area. Herbie was deployed to an infection site, also known as Site A, without any damage. It remained at the outside perimeter of the village for 2 hours, observing several infected humans and fire damage to many of the homes, before following an infected into an intact house. Herbie's camera feed captured the infected person entering the house and sitting down at the table inside. There were several other infected humans in the house, and one unidentified infected creature that remained immobile under the table. After viciously assaulting one of the other infected humans, the infected returned to the table and began to lay out plates on top of it. Pieces of its flesh began to wriggle and tear away from its body, before settling onto each plate. Once the plates were filled, the infected sitting at the table began to grab at the flesh and crush it into their mouths, in a perverse imitation of a normal mealtime gathering. After capturing this stomach-churning display, Herbie left the house and continued to explore the village. It recorded footage of a large stack of bodies that seemed to be made up of both Russian military and civilians, with an infected sitting on top. As Herbie maneuvered towards the remains of the town hall, an infected grabbed the rover off the ground. Herbie's camera was able to capture the face of the infected that grabbed the rover. The face was that of a young girl, around 10 years old, strangely intact atop a large, distorted body. The final moments of Herbie's camera feed captured the infected girl's face bursting open, revealing tendrils of flesh that pulled Herbie into the gaping maw. Then, the feed cut to black. Herbie was regarded as lost, but the video feed briefly resumed 5 hours later, showing the camera covered with an unidentified slime. After this, the video feed was cut for good, and Herbie abandoned in Site A. The Foundation has sent several manned expeditions into Site A, where many expedition forces have fallen victim to the infected. Several operatives were also lost in an earthquake that revealed a network of underground tunnels. A manned expedition into these tunnels was attempted, and the video feed that was captured by the researchers on the expedition was deeply disturbing. There were images of an abandoned church filled with infected, and a mass of uninfected or partially infected human captives. The final moments of the video feed from this expedition captured several operatives being murdered by an infected human wielding a farming scythe, indicating that the infected are capable of using simple weaponry in addition to brute force. The use of this weapon, paired with the presence of captives in the underground tunnels, paints a terrifying picture of the kind of organization the infected are capable of. No more manned expeditions have been attempted, or if they have been highly classified. Ordinarily, once a new SCP is discovered, it is placed in containment at the Foundation, with special procedures in place so that it can be studied or even neutralized in the rare occasions where it's deemed necessary. When it comes to SCP-610 though, containment might just be impossible. It simply covers too much area and is too dangerous to expose to human researchers. Instead, all infected areas have been isolated with the permission of the Russian government. There is an official perimeter established around these areas, and any civilians that approach them are told to leave under the pretense of ongoing military operations. For once, a top-secret military project is the more innocent answer. Armed guards are placed at the perimeter of every infected area, and any living thing with symptoms of SCP-610 spotted near the perimeter is to be immobilized, killed, and burned from as far away as possible. Any living thing that comes in contact with SCP-610, whether a soldier, a scientist, or a civilian, is immediately terminated and their remains destroyed. If someone comes within 3 meters of an infected organism, they will be quarantined and remotely examined to determine if they have been infected. While the spread of SCP-610 can be airborne, it has been determined to be far less contagious when spread through air particles as opposed to physical contact. The infection sites remain active to this day, like modern-day leper colonies, though they are isolated from the general population, and the military is doing everything in their power to contain the infected. SCP-610 is still very much alive. It is rare for an entity to exist that the Foundation cannot truly contain, but can only try to guard against, and that makes this infection all the more terrifying. Who knows how much it has mutated over the years, growing, spreading, hungry for new hosts. There is still so much that the Foundation does not know about the flesh that hates, such as how it works, what it can do, or even where it came from, since the origin of the first infection is still, at this point, entirely unknown. It has shown itself to be capable of learning, planning, and protecting itself, so who is to say that it couldn't figure out a way to escape from its isolated area? It is so highly contagious and spreads so quickly that just one tiny infected rabbit and one inattentive soldier could be enough for SCP-610 to reach the general population. If it did, its violent, destructive nature and hatred for all life would mean that everything, not just the people, but animals, plants, and the world itself, could be at risk. And no one is ready for this kind of infection, a disease that turns the human body against itself, turns our skin into a weapon and a tomb, stripping away identity, humanity, and everything that isn't made of the same hateful flesh. So let's hope that the perimeter holds. And the next time you feel a little itchy, try not to think about what might happen next.
It was the summer of 2012 in Damascus, and for the people of Syria, it certainly seemed like all the predictions about the end of the world were coming true. The Syrian civil war was raging between multiple rebel groups, and the dictator Bashar al-Assad, whose government was shelling its own people, as well as using chemical weapons and brutal campaigns of violence across the country in hopes of quelling the rebellion. Little did they know, amidst all this pain and bloodshed, something even more dangerous was brewing. An anomalous phenomenon in the sunny plains north of Damascus that may pose a threat to all of humanity someday. A threat known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-3989, the Bone Orchard. This temporal and spatial anomaly was discovered a few years earlier in 2009, before the Syrian civil war even officially began. It's strange for a highly dangerous Keter-class anomaly to be discovered under such seemingly mundane circumstances. The SCP Foundation first became aware of SCP-3989 after a small olive orchard owner sold a strangely high amount of olives that shouldn't have been possible when compared to his reported number of Olea europaea olive trees. Field agents were dispatched to question the owner about his sudden success, but he was resistant to questioning. The agents began a covert surveillance operation to figure out what was actually going on here, at which point they discovered a considerable spatial anomaly. The olive orchard was far bigger on the inside. The property was seized by the Foundation for containment. The owner had no real knowledge of the spatial anomaly. It's likely he just decided not to look a gift horse in the mouth while making money hand over fist from the extra olives he sold. The owner was given amnestics and a new life, as the Foundation began to study this anomaly, which was now labeled SCP-3989. To this day, no researcher has been able to figure out the origin of 3989's anomalous qualities. It was first given a Euclid class designation and cordoned off from the public with a simple chain-link fence, while Foundation investigations were underway on the inside. On a map, the plot of land the olive farm should occupy is about 5 square acres. but this plot contains an unseen portal to a pocket dimension within its 12-meter active zone, which doesn't follow the same spatial laws that our reality does. This subdimension, known as SCP-3989-A, is a hotbed of fascinating anomalous activity. Upon discovery of this hot zone, the Foundation established the nearby Area 126 as a research center and a makeshift containment facility for any anomalous entities captured from SCP-3989-A. It seemed like the Foundation really had a handle on this situation, but they were blissfully unaware of the true horrors lurking within SCP-3989-A. But they'd soon find out, in the most horrifying way possible. Dr. Farrah Ghazelli was assigned to head the research into the anomalous zone within 3989, and naturally, he began organizing fact-finding expeditions into the heart of the affected area. The first guinea pig to head into the hot zone was former Foundation agent Hosea Herrick, who'd been demoted to the lowly D-class position of D-126-15 due to failures on a previous mission. With a remote link to Dr. Ghazelli, Herrick was forced to venture into the active anomalous zone to collect footage and samples of the flora and fauna within. The first thing Herrick noticed on his expedition was the strange quality of the olive trees within the active zone. The bark was a stark white, and the leaves a bloody red. Up close, Herrick could see that the trunks and branches of the trees had undergone a process known as ossification, where the material slowly becomes bone or bone-like tissue. Hence the anomaly's creepy name, the Bone Orchard. These ossified trees became known as SCP-3989-1. Herrick also made another discovery. All over the trees and ground were worm-like creatures that looked like long maggots that the Foundation dubbed SCP-3989-1A. Agent Herrick then noticed something was off about the leaves of the ossified trees. They were beating. He looked closer and they appeared to be heart tissue filled with pumping veins. Dr. Ghazelli ordered Herrick to take a branch for testing, and when he did, the tree began to bleed. When he looked down, he saw that the worm-like creatures that covered the ground were now crawling up his legs. Ignoring orders from Dr. Ghazelli, Herrick fled from the active zone in terror. As he left, Dr. Ghazelli caught something in the corner of Herrick's body cam footage, a long white hind limb disappearing behind a tree. Back in our normal dimension, tests on the sample Herrick collected yielded more upsetting discoveries. Genetically, the trees were identical to humans, the trunks were human bone, and the leaves really were made of human heart tissue. Fascinated and just a little bit horrified, Dr. Ghazelli authorized further expeditions into 3989-A. This time, though, Agent Herrick would be accompanied by another D-class, and both would be armed with handguns and protective body armor. As it would turn out, this expedition would be even more horrifying than the first. As the two D-classes explored the active zones to collect further samples, they found that the worms were responsible for the ossification of the otherwise non-anomalous olive trees. They consumed the wood little by little and deposited human bone matter in return. Herrick and his companion also noticed that these trees were beginning to bear fruit. Dr. Ghazelli ordered Herrick to collect some of this fruit for testing, but when they attempted to remove the fruit, it burst, releasing more worm creatures. It seemed that the converted trees acted as incubators for their egg sacs. Before the duo could return with the samples they were able to take, the creature that had been spotted on Herrick's body cam during the first mission finally appeared. It was huge, with long white limbs, and no facial features except for a huge mouth. It grabbed Herrick's companion and literally ate the top half of his body in a single bite, before dropping his legs to the ground. This horrifying beast, and the many others like it, would later be designated as SCP-3989-2A. Herrick pulled out his sidearm and shot the creature several times. The creature ignored the bullets though, and charged Herrick. The feed from his body cam cut out soon after. Both men were declared killed in action, and in recognition of his sacrifice, Josiah Herrick was posthumously reinstated to his old position in the Foundation. Job well done, Agent. Dr. Ghazelli, meanwhile, prepared for the next mission. This time knowing of the clear dangers present within the Bone Orchard, Dr. Ghazelli recruited the help of MTF Zeta-9, aka the Mole Rats. 3 members, referred to as Charlie Team, were sent into the anomalous zone, once again remotely directed by Dr. Ghazelli. They were equipped with experimental ultrasound technology, so they could scan the fruit of the trees within 3989-A without breaking any and incurring the wrath of 3989-2A, which seemed to act as sentries for the trees. Early on in their journey, they found the body of Agent Herrick crucified against one of the ossified trees, his skin covered in mysterious symbols that were likely of Sarkic origin. While we don't have time to fully explore Sarkicism, that will require a video explanation all of its own. All you need to know is that it's a dangerous religious cult that worships flesh and disease and has close ties to similar dangerous anomalies, like SCP-610, also known as the Flesh That Hates. People familiar with that SCP will note eerily strange similarities to some of the things the mole rats were about to encounter. As Charlie Team explored, they saw a huge number of 3989-2As observing them with eyeless faces from between the ossified trees. They pressed on until they discovered what seemed to be an entirely new kind of tree within the Bone Orchard. SCP-3989-2 were huge trees made out of what appears to be enlarged human spines in place of a trunk. The smaller twigs on the tree were made from heart and lung tissue, and the whole thing was covered in what appeared to be human amniotic sacs. Charlie Team attempted to use their ultrasound scanners to discover the contents of these sacs, but one of them exploded in the process, releasing an entirely new variety of monster. From the sacs emerged the larval stage of SCP-3989-2B, smaller humanoid monsters with no faces, no sensory organs, 2 pelvises, 4 legs, and an exposed spine. Suddenly, Charlie Team could feel a horrifying Sarkic presence around them, which one member of the team described as being like someone grabbing her liver and giggling in her face. As the various monsters of the Bone Orchard began to converge on the team, the voice of the Sarkic prophet of war and the hunt, Oruk, began sounding in their ears. He was beckoning them to join him. While Charlie Team fled from the active zone, Dr. Gazzelli felt increasingly drawn into it. He heard the voice of Oruk, and he liked what he heard. Little by little, the workers of Area 126 were losing their minds, manipulated by the Sarkic power of the Bone Orchard right next to them, day after day. They were no longer loyal to the Foundation. They wanted to serve their new dark masters. The fourth and final expedition was led by Dr. Gazzelli himself. He took a band of loyal followers and one non-believer on a quest into the active zone to find an Orcian temple they believed was hidden in the very heart of the Bone Orchard. Once they were inside, Gazzelli and his loyalists murdered the non-believer as a sacrifice to their new master. They carried on until they eventually found what they were looking for, a giant stone temple resembling an Aztec ziggurat, dubbed SCP-3989-4. There they also encountered a new kind of monster, dubbed SCP-3989-3. These beasts were larger than the others and resembled ancient warriors. They had insect-like exoskeletal armor, horned heads, additional hind and forelimbs, and integrated bladed weapons. What Dr. Gazzelli and his companions thought would be paradise turned out to be a kind of hell as they were led into the temple, where temporal and spatial distortions broke their mind, and the multiple highly aggressive instances of SCP-3989-3, -2A, and -2B broke their bodies. The whole thing had been a horrifying trap. In that moment, back at Area 126, another fleshy, horrifying tree sprouted out of the ground in the middle of the complex. Monsters that had once been Dr. Gazzelli and his followers emerged from its amniotic sacs, and all hell broke loose throughout the complex. Soon enough, the base was crawling with monsters from the Bone Orchard and staff who'd become brainwashed Sarkic cultists working in service of Oruk. Humans were gathered up to be sacrificed to the ever-growing number of anomalous trees. Things came to a head when the anomaly in Area 126 was visited by an outside agent from the Foundation, working on behalf of the Hazardous Materials Containment Liaison. Biological Containment Specialist Dr. Marshall Grant and his team arrived at the site and were horrified to see the Sarkic nightmare that had unfolded. They quickly engaged in a firefight with the anomalous creatures and Sarkic devotees who'd gained control over Area 126. A number of Dr. Grant's team were lost in the process, but thankfully,
They were able to eventually regain control of the base and the anomalous area. After this incident, SCP-3989 was upgraded to Keter class and given a huge upgrade in security, including 4-meter-high concrete walls and a platoon-sized regiment of Mobile Task Force members with heavy weaponry. The force that took over the minds of those exposed was designated SCP-3989-5, a force so powerful that those infected are given the choice to self-terminate or be contained forever. This may seem like a somewhat happy ending to a grim tale, but one detail keeps Dr. Grant and everyone at the Foundation who is forced to deal with 3989 awake at night. According to all recent studies into the Bone Orchard, it isn't contained at all. In fact, the active zone is getting bigger. There was nothing out of the ordinary about Timmy Mason. Like a lot of healthy 8-year-old boys, Timmy liked to go on little adventures in and around his neighborhood. And now that summer vacation had finally rolled around, he had more time than ever to explore. But during one particularly hot day, Timmy suddenly realized that he was exhausted. The heat was beginning to get to him, and he'd forgotten to pack a water bottle. All he had was a couple of dollars and a handful of quarters rattling around in his pocket. He was considering heading to a nearby corner store and purchasing a drink when he first heard the music. It was a tinny rendition of Pop Goes the Weasel playing in the distance, underscored by the rumbling of an engine. Timmy's face lit up. This could only mean one thing: an ice cream truck, just in time. He ran in the direction of the sounds, not wanting to miss out on the cool, sweet relief from the intense summer heat. But when the ice cream truck suddenly rounded a corner and came into view, Timmy felt a pang of anxiety. It didn't look like most of the ice cream trucks he had seen driving around his neighborhood in prior summers. It was shoddy, an older, more boxy model with peeling white paint. But it was so hot out that Timmy felt he couldn't afford to be picky if he wanted to cool off. The ice cream truck came to a noisy stop, and Timmy ran over. When he reached the side of the truck, he noticed some other strange details. There was no serving hatch in the back of the truck. The closest thing was a thin, dark groove cut into the driver's side door. A door that seemed almost drawn onto the side of the truck, rather than a door that looked like it could actually open. How could the driver get in? And adding to the strangeness, there was no menu on the truck either. Typically on your friendly neighborhood ice cream truck, you'd find a colorful collection of all the frozen treats you could buy, along with how much they'd cost you, but not here. Timmy gulped nervously. He knew something was wrong here, but for some reason he couldn't seem to pull himself away. He cleared his throat, forced a polite smile, and said, "Can I get a green popsicle, please?" There was a strange rumbling noise inside the ice cream truck. Suddenly, the slot in the door opened a little wider, and a long green popsicle in a plastic wrapper emerged. It came with a small piece of paper with $5.75 in loose, scratchy handwriting on it. Timmy regarded the note with suspicion and said that he was sorry, but he didn't have $5.75. Something inside the truck began rumbling again, louder this time, more aggressive. While the truck growled from within, Timmy noticed something else was wrong. His popsicle was no ordinary popsicle. It was a dead snake, straightened out and frozen solid. Timmy screamed and dropped the so-called popsicle. He turned and began to run, but it was already too late. The slot behind him yawned open fully, and a rusty spring-loaded chain fired out like a harpoon. On the end of this chain was a large snapping bear trap, which quickly latched onto Timmy's left leg. The chain yanked and pulled him backwards, dragging him ever closer to the darkened crevice in the truck's door. Moments later, he was pulled inside and the hatch closed behind him. His screams were muffled, and then overpowered entirely by the rumbling within. Soon after, there was silence. And finally, the cheerful tune of Pop Goes the Weasel began to play once more. The truck drove away, prepared to serve its frozen delights to another child, somewhere, anywhere. Not long after Timmy was reported missing, another young boy bought a scoop of strawberry ice cream and a waffle cone from the same truck. The boy's mother was horrified to find that this alleged ice cream was full of what seemed like blood and raw meat. Lab tests later confirmed that this gory ice cream was a perfect genetic match for poor, missing Timmy Mason. It didn't take long for the SCP Foundation to get involved, seeing as mysterious, horrifying deaths like this one were often the first sign of an anomaly's presence in the area.
and they were able to quickly track down and isolate the rogue ice cream truck. This wasn't especially difficult for the agents assigned to the case, since it literally announced its presence with loud, obnoxious music. While it was easy to find, the ice cream truck, soon designated SCP-1386, did however prove to be more difficult to contain than they first imagined. When a mobile task force attempted to engage the truck in hopes of apprehending it, an ear-splitting siren began to blast from the truck's undercarriage. This caused catastrophic inner-ear damage to everyone involved. Incidentally, it's now believed that the reason the ice cream truck engaged in this defensive behavior had nothing to do with the fact the mobile task force was armed, but rather because of what they weren't carrying. It appears that SCP-1386 doesn't turn on its siren because of danger, but when it detects that someone is approaching it who isn't carrying any money. Eventually, the Foundation was able to trick the ice cream truck into containment, luring it into a fake, walled-off neighborhood, where it could drive its rounds constantly without the risk of encountering civilians. All those who had previous encounters with the ice cream truck were given amnestic treatment, and SCP-1386 was finally, officially, contained. But while it had been taken off the streets, the Foundation's work was only just beginning. It was time for research to commence. The first key discoveries that aided in the investigation involved the factors that are required for SCP-1386 to even serve its subjects in the first place. As the previously mentioned Mobile Task Force learned, you need to approach the truck with at least $20 in cash to be absolutely sure that it won't turn your ears inside out. The truck also proves to be extremely adept at reading human emotions, and refuses to serve anyone who doesn't appear happy. With these requirements now known, the Foundation felt prepared to finally make some orders. First, they sent in a pair of Level 3 researchers. Each of them requested a delicious cookies and cream flavored smoothie. The truck pushed both smoothies out of the slot in its door, one marked with the letter M and the other with the letter G. A handwritten receipt with a price of $4.89 written on it. They paid the price and the transaction ended without incident. The smoothies were apparently pretty good, too. Next, one of the researchers returned, perhaps longing for another taste of SCP-1386's wonderful ice cream. This time he requested a Neapolitan ice cream sandwich. The truck rumbled for a moment before dispensing what seemed to be a ham and cheese sandwich with slices of tomato. However, upon taking a bite out of the sandwich, the researcher found that this was actually just a perfect replica of a ham and cheese sandwich made from Neapolitan ice cream. The receipt released from the slot simply said, "April Fools," before the truck drove away without even asking for any payment. The same researcher would return to the ice cream truck one more time, this time requesting a single scoop of vanilla ice cream in a waffle cone. It was provided to him without issue, and he happily paid the 72 cents the truck requested in return. The next test wouldn't go quite as swimmingly, by which we mean it caused a horrifying death. This time, a slightly more senior researcher wanted to perform a test on the ice cream truck. He asked for a peach-flavored push pop, which he received without issue. However, when he refused to pay the price, an admittedly steep $16, all hell broke loose. As he tried to walk away, the hatch opened a full 6 feet, releasing its large, rusty metal trap around the senior researcher. He was pulled into the truck, followed by a horrific rumbling noise. Not long after, the slot began to spew a stream of pink liquid for a solid 5 minutes, before driving away. This pink puree was later proven to be a genetic match to the researcher. After this, the Foundation refused to allow any other researchers to interact with SCP-1386. Only D-Class personnel would be permitted to take part in the tests. In contrast to the senior researcher's horrifying death, the D-Class personnel seemed to get along extremely well with SCP-1386. The first D-Class asked for a cherry popsicle with nuts. The truck produced an unwrapped cherry popsicle with nuts embedded in the ice, along with a receipt reading $2.20, your nuts. The D-Class chuckled as he read the receipt and paid the truck without incident. The second D-Class requested a more esoteric treat, a Caesar salad flavor popsicle. However, the ice cream truck isn't one to back down from a challenge. It produced an off-green popsicle that tasted like, quote, lightly dressed lettuce with a hint of croutons. The next D-Class ordered a dark chocolate fudge pop, but wasn't able to pay an exact change. He gave the truck $2 bills and was given a carefully wrapped package with a crude drawing of US currency on the front. When the package was opened, he saw that it contained the exact change he required, down to the penny. He made an official request to the Foundation to keep the change, but his request was denied. The Foundation then pushed its D-Class personnel to ask for more complex constructions, just to see what SCP-1386 was capable of. The next D-Class asked for a Kinder Surprise egg, the kind which are banned in the US due to their history as being a choking hazard. However, the ice cream truck didn't have a hard time constructing the egg, except this one was made out of ice cream rather than chocolate. It did seem beyond the truck's capability to create the toy inside, instead including a small piece of paper reading, "I owe you one toy." The next interaction wasn't quite as cordial. The D-Class requested 1 cherry ice lolly, 1 cherry ice pop, 1 cherry popsicle, and 1 cherry-flavored drink, frozen. This resulted in the ice cream truck making a horrifying noise, described as being like someone skinning a cat in reverse. It then unceremoniously ejected the red ice, causing it to shatter on the ground, before releasing a styrofoam cup filled with frozen green liquid. This liquid was shown to contain huge quantities of arsenic, but was thankfully impossible to drink, on account of the fact that its melting point is so high that it's impossible to liquefy with current technology. And our current knowledge of SCP-1386 testing ends with its strangest story of all. A nonverbal D-Class was instructed to write his order on a piece of paper to pass to the truck, in hopes of seeing if it would respond to written commands. A slot opened up in the door a few inches lower than the usual slot, and a thin, flesh-colored appendage slithered out, its hand a kind of two-fingered pincher. It took the note from the D-Class and gave him an ice cream cone in return. The D-Class was visibly disturbed by the hand, saying that it looked horrifying and smelled like death. He even refused to eat the ice cream, saying that he'd lost his appetite. But other D-Classes capable of verbal articulation did not report any strange occurrences with the hand. They said that they found the hand to look completely normal, and as time went on, they began to trust the ice cream truck with increasing devotion, while their mistrust in the disturbed, mute D-Class only grew. In the strangest twist of all, this D-Class was later found dead in his cell from strangulation. The D-Class was alone in his cell, and there were no signs of forced entry. Perhaps he should have enjoyed his ice cream while he still could. You know what they say, I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. And no ice cream is more scream-worthy than the one served up by SCP-1386.
Roll up, come one and all. The circus is in town, and not just any circus. The greatest show in all the multiverse. Don't pay attention to the fact that the tents weren't here yesterday, or that you don't remember hearing anything about it before now. That's just the circus magic at work. And there's no circus more magical or more mysterious than Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting. It's a show so marvelous that even the SCP Foundation wants to get in on the act. So come watch the show, come feel the magic. After all, what do you have to lose? The story of this humbling traveling show begins in 1893 with the founder Herman S. Fuller. He was born into a wealthy family, and at the age of 21, he was invited by his uncle to Chicago to see the buildings his company had constructed for the World's Fair. He was dazzled by the sights he saw in the Windy City, and from then on he dedicated his life to finding a way to bring that same awe to people across America, and eventually, the world. After receiving a small loan from his uncle, Herman Fuller set about building the miraculous circus you see before you today. He knew he had to get a leg up over his competitors. After all, the 1890s were a golden age for traveling shows in America. So Herman devoted his time to research, trying to find acts and oddities that were truly out of this world. He learned the way between worlds, stole books from the Wanderer's Library, and with them studied alchemy, transmutation, sarcasm, and other supernatural disciplines. That real magic and touch of the macabre would be what made Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting so special, and would ultimately give it its longevity. Herman Fuller's first anomalous acquisition was a genuine Fiji mermaid, like the one that famed showman P.T. Barnum kept on display around the same time period. Unlike Barnum's, however, Fuller's mermaid had been brought to life. The crowds loved it, but like all attractions, pretty soon crowds grew bored of it and hungered for the next strange sight. So Fuller went about acquiring more curiosities. His next important acquisition was the man with the upside-down face, or Manny for short. He serves as second in command to the ringmaster and manages things behind the scenes, including the acquisition of new talent. Many other anomalous beings and items were purchased for the circus by Fuller through the auction company known as Marshall, Carter & Dark, another group that the SCP Foundation makes a habit of keeping tabs on. Another thing that sets this circus apart from any others is the clowns, because they aren't like any you've seen before. Though Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting employs professional clowns, the vast majority of the clown troupe are non-human descendants of an extra-dimensional race of magical shapeshifters. Nobody really knows why they decided to come to our reality and help Herman Fuller set up his circus, but the leading theory is simply that they were bored. These original clowns are the progenitors of the turn clowns and the bread clowns. Turn clowns being humans who underwent a clown transformation procedure, and the bread clowns being artificially grown children produced by the other two types. Earlier in the circus's history, before we knew what we know today about genetics, much more barbaric methods were used to create new clowns. Young human subjects would be subjected to beatings and painful transfigurations at the hands of the circus's child breaker. These days, however, the circus no longer employs a child breaker. Instead, the creation of new clowns is the responsibility of resident clown breeder, Richard C. Normus. And before you say anything, don't laugh. That is his real name. Some of the most famous clowns in the troupe are Eugene and Pius, both of which are original clowns. Mr. Noodles, who is a bread clown, and Icky the troupe leader, who was once a human with magical abilities known as Veronica Mason. She still possesses her anomalous powers as Icky, and her magic act is one of the most beloved parts of our show. After the sudden disappearance of Herman Fuller, Icky inherited his position as ringmaster and has been doing a spectacular job ever since. Not every attempt to create new clowns has been successful as Icky and Mr. Noodles, though. Some of the earlier attempts were quite grotesque to look at. Herman Fuller's troupe of clowns are an enthusiastic, happy-go-lucky, but occasionally violent bunch, capable of minor feats of reality bending that allow them to perform all manner of tricks. They live on a diet of mostly sugar and need to be milked regularly. Clown milk is an invaluable substance here at the circus, as it's the secret ingredient of the famous black cotton candy, which, by the way, is free with admission. It causes the brain to produce high levels of serotonin, meaning that when you eat it, you're primed to have a great time. Be careful though. Raw, concentrated clown milk is not for human consumption. Though the clowns love to drink it, even a small amount can cause a human to go into cardiac arrest due to an overload of happiness. The sound of calliope music also goes a long way to helping people truly get the most out of their visit to Herman Fuller's Circus of the Disquieting. The calliope is self-playing and requires rolls of perforated paper to be loaded into it so that it can play a variety of pre-programmed pieces of music. Each piece produces a different psychological effect on visitors who have consumed their cotton candy. The skater's waltz will make them accept whatever they see at the circus, no matter how weird, as nothing out of the ordinary. Wonderful for making sure nobody blabs about their experience to a certain pesky foundation. Officer of the Year makes them less likely to perceive an event as unlawful. We use that one when we suspect the cops are closing in. Hail, hail, the gang's all here is used to get people to congregate at the big top for showtime. And American Patrol causes those who have eaten their cotton candy to seek out those who haven't, in order to strongly encourage them to have some. What do you mean you lost your dog is one that gets played after hours, when it's time to get the clowns ready for milking. Now that you have an idea of the history and how things work around the circus, it's time for the tour. The circus is made up of a series of tents and trailers, as well as a midway with standard rides and games that you might find at any circus. Outside of the big top, where shows are performed once a day, there's also the Den of Freaks and the Hall of Humans Extraordinaire. The Den of Freaks is home to fantastic acts like Sluggo and Eliza the Living Head.
Sluggo is a man whose eyes are on stalks like those of a slug, and he can bend those stalks into any shape he wishes. He can even use them to create the shapes of human faces. Eliza the Living Head is a woman whose head lives independently of her body, which is safely kept in storage. Even without her body, she can speak and sing and often answers questions from the audience. The Hall of Humans Extraordinaire is home to performers who lack physical anomalies, but otherwise display otherworldly talents like the amazing Zoltan, a fortune teller and alchemist who Fuller picked up at a place called the Utterly Bizarre. The Hall of Humans Extraordinaire also used to be home to Icky the Clown, back when she was still Veronica the Magician. The recent lineup has changed quite a bit thanks mainly to the activities of the circus's constant enemy. You guessed it, the SCP Foundation. Or as they are better known to the stable of interdimensional clowns as the Miss SCP Foundation. The Foundation does not appear to be a fan of circus folk, and many of the former acts are now in their containment. For example, Madame Rezarta and her amazing palm reader, also known as SCP-1884-A and SCP-1884-B. Madame Rezarta was a blind Albanian woman in her 60s who was born without hands. She shared a psychic link with a creature named Luana, who was a large, shapeless entity made up of 932 hands. 929 of these hands appear to be those of an old woman and share Madame Rezarta's DNA. But the remaining 3 hands seem to be from a male Caucasian adolescent, an adult Hispanic female, and a Bengal tiger. Through her psychic link, Luana acted as Madame Rezarta's eyes, feeling its surroundings to provide her with a mental map. Fuller attempted to buy the 2 of them when they were 8 years old, but when their parents refused, he sent Manny to whisk them away under the cover of darkness. Madame Rezarta's act involved sending Luana to feel the faces of audience members, and then trying to describe their appearance based on what Luana felt. The act was a hit, but Madame Rezarta claimed to have been horribly abused during her time with Herman Fuller. The 2 of them escaped while on tour and were picked up by old SCP while trying to rent a hotel room in the UAE. Then there's Virtuoso, also known as SCP-1860. Virtuoso was once a book of sheet music that was transfigured by Herman Fuller into one of the circus's original acts. It's a tall, thin humanoid being encased in a densely woven paper-based material that stretches like nylon or spandex. It constantly drips black ink which it has a telekinetic control over. It uses the ink to create the shapes of musical notes, which float around it while it sings. Virtuoso can sing in multiple voices at once across different vocal ranges, and constantly performs arias and show tunes for whoever is listening. It was recovered from underneath a burnt-down shack at a fairground where the circus had been set up earlier. In containment, Virtuoso still sings, but translations from Italian reveal that the lyrics of the arias it's singing have been changed to reflect its own situation. Some of these translated lyrics include, "One day I'll tell you of my creation and life within the circus, born from the ringmaster, his breed." Another act the circus dearly misses is Motormouth, also known as SCP-2094. He was one of the rare human clowns born in New York City in the late 70s. From birth, he displayed a supernatural level of flexibility in his lower jaw, and as he grew older, he discovered that he could swallow large objects and store them in a kind of pocket dimension until he needed them again. Unlike Madame Rezarta, he went with Manny willingly, as even at 8 years old, he knew that his alcoholic mother didn't care if he lived or died. Motormouth took to the circus like a fish to water, and grew from a shy child into a very talented, talkative, and highly charismatic adult. He was a juggler first and foremost, who would catch pins, balls, and knives in his mouth as part of his routine. But the name Motormouth came later in his career when he let a stunt driver drive a car off a ramp and down his throat. However, as great an act he was, a conflict arose between him and Manny over Manny's questionable methods of sourcing new acts. Manny found out that Motormouth had been helping some of the anomalous kids that Manny brought in to get back to their families. And as punishment for his insubordination, he was locked in a box and left behind at the end of a Japanese tour. The box was marked for Essie, because many thought being put in containment was the best punishment he could think of. With how strange and unusual its acts are, and how it always seems to pop in and out of new locations at strange and unpredictable times, you might wonder if the circus has any sinister motives. Well, the truth is, though sometimes the acts can be a little gruesome, their methods of acquiring new talent are a little unorthodox, and the clowns a little out of control. Their only goal is to entertain. In that respect, they're no better or worse than any other circus. So we hope you've enjoyed your visit. Make sure to stick around for the show, and don't forget to take your complimentary serving of cotton candy. Because there's nothing quite like a day at the circus, especially one like Herman Fuller's. Addiction. It takes many forms and wears many faces, like a demon walking among us. It takes over your life, crawling in and changing you from the inside out. Breaking an addiction is hard, but oftentimes not giving it up is much harder. That was a difficult lesson to learn for 3 people: Joey Walker, Dolly McGregor, and Paul Abels. These 3 had never met one another, and now they never will. But each one of them had 2 things in common. First was that each had an addiction they felt like they couldn't shake, and second was that they each had a run-in with SCP-666. Joey Walker was at the end of his rope when he encountered it. Everyone has bad days, but for Joey, every day for the last 15 years has been a bad day. He was pushing 40 with nothing to show for it, except credit card debt, a scraggly beard, and a beat-up old Mustang. But booze had always been there for him. No matter how bad things got, he could always count on a glass full of comfort at the end of the day. But to paraphrase a quote by Stephen King, sometimes when a man takes a drink, the drink takes the man. And Joey Walker had been long since taken. He was a transient worker, doing jobs wherever jobs needed doing, but he never expected that he would end up all the way to Tibet working construction. Not that he was complaining. Sure, it was cold, but there was plenty of Tibetan Chang to enjoy. It was a drink so good that legends even say that Yetis would raid villages in the mountains just to get a little taste. Joey had taken a liking to the Chang, and it was what he had been drinking when he crashed his car up in the mountains, leaving him stranded in the snow. Joey had survived the crash itself, but he knew he wouldn't last long in the cold. He needed shelter. That's why he felt like he could hardly believe his luck when he first saw the yurt, a kind of traditional Tibetan tent made from animal skins. Joey had never seen anything quite like it, but any refuge from the storm would do. He pushed forward through the snow and climbed inside. But the inside of the yurt was nothing like the outside. In fact, it seemed like an exact replica of his favorite sports bar back in Atlantic City. It was warm. There was all the old memorabilia on the walls, and every screen was showing the Saints wiping the floor with the Colts in the 2010 Super Bowl. Joey didn't even question it. He just smiled and approached the bar. He even recognized the bartender, Malcolm, a good old friend of his. Malcolm smiled back at him, but there was something oddly menacing in his grin. "Welcome back," he said. "I thought you'd hauled your sorry keister off to Tibet. Guess you gave up on that too, just like everything else." "Well, except..." Malcolm pushed a glass of beer towards him across the bar and glared. Joey didn't understand why Malcolm was being so aggressive, but he didn't question that either. He grabbed the glass and drank it up, guzzling it down before slamming the empty glass down on the bar. Malcolm kept the drinks coming, round after round, and Joey kept knocking them back. He didn't notice when the TV screens turned to static. He didn't notice when the other patrons at the bar began to jitter and twitch, turning little by little into something less than human. He didn't even notice when Malcolm's face started melting off his skull as long as he kept pouring. Before he could even really understand what was happening to him, Joey Walker was dead. His liver and kidneys had given out on him. His corpse would later be found frozen on the Tibetan mountainside, just 30 feet away from his crashed car. The coroner's report would list his cause of death as accidental, but this was no accident. He'd fallen victim to SCP-666, an anomalous yurt known to some as the Spirit House.
The being he'd call Malcolm is known to the Foundation as SCP-6666-1, and Joey had failed its challenge. Sadly for our inebriated friend, the penalty for failure is death. Next on our list of human tragedies comes Dolly McGregor, a 62-year-old woman from Anaheim, California. Dolly was never averse to the drink, but she knew how to enjoy her mojitos in moderation. You rarely get to 62 if you don't, and Dolly could tell people with pride that she had 2 children and 6 grandchildren, whom she didn't see nearly often enough for her liking. She also had over $100,000 in gambling debt owed to a number of casinos on the Vegas Strip. Ever since her husband Albert had passed away several years prior, shooting craps, playing blackjack, and willing away the hours in front of the slot machines had been a welcome change from loneliness. But in Vegas, fortunes can change in an instant. Dolly had gone from being on a hot winning streak to losing everything. The casinos extended her lines of credit until she was gambling with money she'd never be able to pay back. But that didn't stop her. She'd been selling off everything, even remortgaging the house that Albert had built with his own 2 hands to try and keep up with her ballooning debts. Still, it wasn't enough, but she couldn't stop either. It wasn't even that she felt good about it anymore. It was just that she only ever felt normal among the flashing lights of slot machines and the clatter of dice. She needed to get away, as far away as possible. She heard about people reaching spiritual enlightenment in Tibet. They'd discover God, or gods, or sometimes just a sense of inner peace. Whatever it was, she needed to find it and get this demon off her back. So she took the last of her savings and flew off to Tibet to clear her head. She didn't know if there were any casinos in Lhasa, but if there were, her money would surely be no good there. It was exactly what she needed. But Tibet wasn't the promised land she thought it would be. Wherever Dolly went, there she was, with the same vices and demons chasing her. The first night she spent in Lhasa, she used the hotel Wi-Fi to download an online poker app on her phone. This culminated in another couple $1,000s lost, and a panic attack that caused Dolly to throw her phone into her toilet before wandering off into the wilderness. She just needed to get away. But time and space got away from her, and eventually she was knee-deep in snow. Where had she come from? Where could she go? It quickly dawned on her that if she didn't find some kind of shelter soon, she'd be done for. But all she could do was keep walking. That's when she happened upon SCP-666. The yurt was like an oasis on the barren mountainside. She didn't expect comfort inside, but it could at least provide her some shelter until the staff back at the hotel noticed she was gone. Then they'd come and save her, right? Right. But when she passed through the yak leather flap into the yurt, Dolly wasn't in an ancient tent in the Tibetan wilderness. She was on a casino floor. There was a big, beautiful roulette table before her, attended to by a grinning, well-dressed croupier. They were flanked by an army of slot machines, and all the pleasing, familiar sounds of cheerful gambling rang out through the air. She approached the table and the croupier shook his head in what seemed like disappointment. Back again, eh, Dolly? He said with a sigh. Of course, I should have expected it. After all, what else do you have in that empty little life of yours, Without all this, you'd be nothing, right? Nothing at all. Since Albert died and the kids want nothing to do with you, we're all you've got. So, Dolly, what'll it be? Red or black? Are you feeling lucky? His words wounded Dolly, but that wouldn't stop her. She grabbed her chips and put them all on red. One last spin couldn't hurt. What did she have to lose? She blinked, and she wasn't sitting at the table anymore. She was upright, but she wasn't standing. Her wrists and ankles were bound to something, to a wheel. A giant roulette wheel, like it was some kind of medieval torture device. The croupier was standing across from her, well, something that used to be a croupier. His face was flickering in and out. Sometimes it was human, sometimes it was a mass of eyes and teeth. More demons were sitting all at the slot machines behind him, pulling levers made from human bones. Good choice, Dolly, the croupier said. Red suits you. He reached out and gave the wheel a spin. Dolly was lost in an overwhelming, pulsing cascade of lights, colors, and sounds. The horrific tinny noises of slot machines and the laughter of the demonic croupier. She was lost in panic and terror as she just kept spinning and spinning and spinning. When her body was eventually found, her muscles were in the advanced stages of atrophy, as though she hadn't been moving for years. Her brain was rotted, and the cause of death was determined as sudden cardiac arrest after an extended period of sleep deprivation and malnutrition. Dolly's family would never really know what happened to her. The SCP Foundation has learned a lot about SCP-666 after containing it in Site-73. Its anomalous effects, namely vivid, complex, and potentially fatal hallucinatory experiences, only affect those with some kind of addiction or dependency. To anyone else entering the yurt, it's just a normal tent. But any addicts who enter will fall under its spell, and are generally transported back to the place where their addiction was at its strongest. There they'll encounter SCP-666-1, an entity that takes the form of a figure from the subject's life, normally one heavily involved in facilitating their addiction. Any kind of addiction seems to trigger it. Alcohol, drugs, gambling, pornography, food, self-destructive behavior, even video games. SCP-666 kills its victims with a twisted mockery of the very thing that they were dependent on in life. It was only with Paul Abels that the Foundation started discovering the other side of the coin. By almost all accounts, Paul is a worse person than anyone on this list. He got addicted to hard drugs early on in life, and took up a life of violent crime to support his habit. He murdered 2 people during a liquor store robbery before being convicted and sentenced to death. He'd then been picked up as a D-class by the SCP Foundation, and selected as a test subject for SCP-666 due to his history of drug abuse. The Foundation expected to be adding his body to the incineration pile sometime soon. None of the researchers working on the case predicted what actually ended up happening. Paul was forced to enter the yurt. Not long after, he found himself standing in a place he'd done everything to try to forget. The dark graffiti-stained alley where he'd been sold his first hit. This was the place that destroyed his life. Every bad decision he'd ever made could be traced back to here, and specifically to one man, Frank. Frank was his first dealer, and now here he was, standing right across from him once more. Frank was grinning like a demon.
Come on, Polly, he said. You gotta trash. We both know what you're gonna do. Don't you feel it? The itch? Come on, one more hit, Polly. That's all you need to feel better. It's time to take your medicine.
Frank, or this thing pretending to be Frank, was right. He did feel the itch. He did want it. Maybe he was no better than this. He began to reach out towards Frank, but then he abruptly pulled his hand back. Frank's eyes widened in genuine surprise as Paul replied, "I'm sorry, that's not me anymore." SCP-666-1 gave a smile and said,
"Maybe it isn't, Polly. Maybe it isn't."
When Paul Abels was removed from the SCP-666 yurt by one of the attending guards, the Foundation researchers discovered something amazing. Paul was very much alive, and more incredibly, he didn't feel the cravings anymore. His addiction was gone, and further tests showed that Paul wasn't a one-off event. In fact, anyone who denies the temptation of SCP-666 will see their addictions miraculously disappear when they finally leave. After this, it became clear to the Foundation that SCP-666 isn't just a way to punish addicts. It's a kind of test. Those who want to change, who are willing to truly confront their demons and resist the pull of temptation, are rewarded with the one thing they want most in their life: freedom from their addiction. SCP-666 can be your doom or your salvation. And like most things in life, you get what you give. Can a thought be infectious? Is it possible that transferring an idea can happen as easily as catching the common cold? Someone gets it, then transmits it to another person who then passes it on to someone else, and so on. Imagine for a moment that information is a disease. We can't see information or feel it. We can read it in books or on the internet, but actually seeing it or feeling it inside our heads is impossible. So what if something could taint the information we absorb? Use it to slip its way undetected into your mind, then pass from you to your friends, your family, your coworkers. How would you know it was there? And how could you prevent it from getting into your head? Perhaps it's time you were introduced to SCP-3002. Over its many years of studying and containing anomalous beings and entities, the SCP Foundation has encountered a number of creatures with memetic abilities. If you are unfamiliar with the term, memetic usually refers to data or information that has been manipulated in order to influence or subconsciously change a person's behavior. This can take any form, from text and images to spoken phrases and other audio. For example, a form of memetic influence we have all experienced at some point is product placement. If you ever watched a character in a movie or on TV using a certain product, then that may have made you decide that you want to buy that same product for yourself. That idea was planted in your head by something you saw and had a subliminal influence on your behavior. SCP-3002 is one such entity that uses memetic stimuli for its own nefarious purposes. Some anomalies, like SCP-2440, use memetic information to spread knowledge of themselves among human beings, getting stronger the more people learn about it. SCP-3002, on the other hand, is information. This entity is a thought, a living, sentient thought, with a number of abilities that allow it to influence the minds of human beings. It is hard to picture a thought, let alone one that is alive. Since we can't see information, the idea of something so abstract having a tangible form boggles the mind. SCP-3002 is capable of shapeshifting, and while it does not possess its own consistent shape, the entity is able to transform itself into the form of any piece of information it chooses. Existing as pure information means that it is intangible to any beings that possess physical bodies. But what makes SCP-3002 a threat to everyone at the Foundation and earned this entity its Keter classification is its power to manipulate a person's mind or memories, allowing SCP-3002 to directly enter human minds. Moving at the speed that thoughts can travel through the brain, this entity is almost impossible to kill or kept contained. SCP-3002 can spread like a sickness through a human population, attacking new minds and taking control of its victims. According to the Foundation's research, there is only one way to remove the influence of SCP-3002. Anyone that comes under the control of this entity has to undergo complex, intricate, and risky brain surgery in order to physically remove the entity from their minds. However, the Foundation considers this method to be impractical, time-consuming, cost-ineffective, and is rendered utterly pointless if SCP-3002 has infected too much of a subject's mind. So instead, in order to prevent the spread of SCP-3002's influence, all Foundation personnel are instructed to terminate any person contaminated by this living thought. This order is extended to that individual's family, friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances. Given that SCP-3002 can take the form of any information it chooses, written words, a sound, even a telepathic signal, anyone even remotely linked to someone the entity infects has to be destroyed to stop any potential spread. If you or anyone you knew were to come into contact with SCP-3002, the entity would be able to take control of your entire consciousness. All your memories would be ripe for the entity's picking. SCP-3002 is able to sift through your temporal lobe where memories are stored, and can not only destroy and delete an infected person's memories, but can also create false memories to replace them. And all the while, you would be completely unaware that this was happening to you, stripped of all your natural survival instincts while SCP-3002 runs riot in your brain. There is currently no known limit to how much of someone's mind SCP-3002 is able to mimic, rewrite, alter, or remove. When the entity alters one of your memories, that memory will become an additional instance of SCP-3002. In other words, it can implant itself in every moment of your life, making itself a part of everything you remember about your own personal past and even the parts you can't. Once SCP-3002 has spread itself to every piece of information stored inside your brain, the next stage of infection begins, and SCP-3002 is able to take full control of a person's body. Much like before, this could be happening to you without you ever being consciously aware of it. Usually this doesn't come to much, and infected victims will carry on their day-to-day lives, acting no different to how they would normally. That is until SCP-3002 detects a new target that hasn't been infected yet. When this happens, any people previously exposed to SCP-3002 will collectively seek out the uncontaminated individual, capturing them. Once this happens, SCP-3002's infected army will force their new victim to join them. The SCP Foundation considers SCP-3002 to be extremely hostile and a major threat to their organization and the world at large. Due to SCP-3002 being uncontainable and able to infinitely adapt, it has evaded capture or termination for a considerable length of time. Having the ability to spread among human beings via the information we share with each other, speech, texts, emails, phone calls, any information at all, means that potentially any and all information could contain SCP-3002. According to calculations of the Foundation's top researchers, 78% of humanity may be under the influence of SCP-3002 without any awareness that they have been infected. While dangerous and unstoppable, SCP-3002 doesn't operate purely on instinct. It doesn't infect as many minds as it can just because it knows no other way. Everything that SCP-3002 does is a premeditated, calculated decision with one nefarious intention, one goal: to destroy the SCP Foundation from the inside out by killing or infecting every member of personnel. Believe it or not, SCP-3002 didn't begin life as a sentient, infectious thought. In fact, SCP-3002 was once a person, a regular human being like you or I. She even had a name, Lily Veselka. It is widely believed that Lily Veselka became what we now know as SCP-3002 due to the actions of the Foundation itself. Since becoming SCP-3002, Lily seems to have been searching for any information she can find regarding a highly secret operation conducted by the SCP Foundation known as Project Lethe. As well as this, she appears to have an interest in a number of Foundation research facilities, including Site E and an off-the-books facility located in Ukraine's Yuseninsky National Park. This is potentially where SCP-3002 was first created. If any of this is to be believed, then it would certainly explain SCP-3002's noticeable aggression towards the Foundation, and its attempts to infect its personnel as an act of revenge. After the project that turned Lily into a living thought, SCP-3002 was later encountered by the Foundation in its current form in South Rock Penitentiary. This prison, located near Lafayette, Indiana, was first visited by one Dr. Daryl Lloyd, one of the SCP Foundation's researchers. The prison psychiatrist, a woman named Dr. Suzanne Fairbank, was the first to notice the effects of SCP-3002 contamination on a number of South Rock Penitentiary's inmates. During sessions with her, several of these prisoners had mentioned an identical memory to Dr. Fairbank. The description of the memory from each of the inmates followed the same structure. The prisoner remembered taking a long walk through a forest with their best friend at the time. This detail, the best friend, is most likely SCP-3002 herself, imitating a figure from each inmate's own childhood memories. At some point in this false shared memory, all the prisoners recalled having an argument with their friend. It was later learned that the figure was Lily Veselka, approaching infected individuals in their memories to ask them questions about the project that had turned her into SCP-3002, often demanding to know, "What do you know about me?" or "Has the project finished?" The Foundation began to investigate this bizarre instance of shared anomalous memory after Dr. Suzanne Fairbank shared her findings on an internet message board, describing what she had witnessed to other psychology experts. At first, Dr. Lloyd, the Foundation's researcher sent to South Rock to gather more information, labeled the situation as low-priority research. Given SCP-3002's ability to adapt and take the form of any information, it was able to avoid immediate detection by the SCP Foundation, and the full extent of Lily's abilities remained hidden. Dr. Lloyd originally classified SCP-3002 as safe, believing it was a little more than a shared childhood memory that the South Rock inmates had described. At first, those that had been infected with this collective memory were able to recount it with perfect accuracy. But as Dr. Lloyd continued to interview and test the affected inmates, the details became scarier. and the memory became less and less defined the further the SCP Foundation looked into it. Perhaps Lily recognized the Foundation's presence and remembered that they were the ones responsible for turning her into a sentient mimetic entity without physical form, and started hiding her tracks. Maybe she was biding herself time, hiding herself away in the minds of the infected prisoners until the time was right. Little did Dr. Lloyd realize at the time just how far SCP-3002's influence had already spread. Lily wasn't just in the inmates' heads, but almost all of the prison staff too, who were now spreading her further and further without even realizing it. Thinking that SCP-3002 would be easy to contain, Dr. Lloyd had the Foundation administer amnestics to all the infected inmates. Amnestics are memory-altering drugs that the SCP Foundation uses to prevent any information about SCPs becoming known to the public. When dealing with mimetic anomalies like SCP-3002 or SCP-2440, amnestics can be particularly useful in removing a person's memories about a mimetic SCP. Dr. Lloyd hoped that this would be the case at South Rock, still thinking SCP-3002 was nothing more than an anomalous shared memory that could be removed. However, removing the false memory that Lily had implanted in the prisoners would not remove her from all their other memories. Additionally, one of the infected inmates was not given amnestics and was brought back to the Foundation for observation. From there, SCP-3002's influence had been able to spread like a sickness through the ranks of the Foundation's own personnel, without their knowledge or detection. Every person whose mind SCP-3002 is able to reach becomes an unwitting carrier for the infectious living thought. It is unknown exactly how many of the SCP Foundation's members are under the control of SCP-3002, granting Lily access to the wealth of secret information and plans that the Foundation keeps hidden. It doesn't matter what level of clearance someone would need to view it. If it's information, it's another way for SCP-3002 to spread. And information, as we know, can take any form, be it a written file, a spoken conversation, or even an informative YouTube video. Now tell me again about the time that we took a walk together in the forest. Hello again. It's good to have you back. And yes, we really do mean you. We're aware that you watch a lot of these videos, drinking in all that classified information about some of the SCP Foundation's most top-secret anomalies. You probably think you're pretty slick, don't you? As if nobody could see you peering in. And even if they could, they wouldn't remember it soon after. Yes, you're a very clever anomaly. We wouldn't even think of arguing against that. That's why this video is about you, SCP-3393. Don't be alarmed, we're on the same page here. We know that you access these files, particularly the files regarding yourself and your own activities. We know that you're on the shy side, and we definitely appreciate that. Unlike our other shy guy, you don't brutally murder everyone who witnesses you. Your greatest crime is accessing and even tampering with SCP Foundation files without permission. But seeing as the Foundation is cold, not cruel, we can think we can forgive that little indiscretion of yours for the greater good. All we ask for is your attention and a few minutes of your time. You're a vain creature, who or whatever you are, so we know you wouldn't even resist the opportunity to hear what we have to say about you. And for the record, you are one of the few people who are actually witnessing this video in the way you're witnessing it right now. It's for your eyes only, so to speak, SCP-3393. This video, its description, and even the coding of its comments section is filled with state-of-the-art mimetic agents cooked up by our best and brightest. To everyone except you, the researcher heading your case, the head of the Anti-Mimetics Division, and a single member of the O5 Council, this is just your average run-of-the-mill video. This is a private conversation between you and the Foundation, SCP-3393. We hope you don't mind the designation. It's not like we know your real name, but we can make some rather educated guesses. We actually know very little about you on the whole, a fact we hope to change in the future. Much like several other anomalies we have files on, such as SCP-055 The Self-Keeping Secret, and SCP-2256 The Very Tall Things, information recorded about you isn't exactly sustainable. It becomes forgotten or unreadable shortly after it's noted down.
It's a clever anomalous ability, and one we've only been able to counteract with the application of powerful amnestic drugs. But clearly that isn't the only thing you have going for you. How do you think you've been able to access all of these videos, filled with classified information about anomalies, groups of interest, and even the inner workings of the Foundation itself? Through methods currently unknown to us, you've been able to somehow give your account level 4 clearance, giving you free reign over almost every file available. As much as it shames us to admit it, we haven't been able to remove this unpermitted clearance from your account, or even locate it for that matter. Like we've said before, you're a very clever anomaly. We respect that about you, even though you've been using this apparently crafty sapiens to inconvenience us. Our best guess is that you owe much of your success to powerful anti-memetic properties inherent to your anomalous being. But if we're off the mark on that, do feel free to enlighten us. Speaking of guesses, let's get back to what we think we know about you. After all, that's why you're really here, isn't it? No point being bashful, SCP-3393. You may be good at hiding yourself, but your intentions are plain as day. You don't need to be a senior researcher here to intuit that much about you. The following are all facts we believe we know about you with 90% confidence. You'll have to let us know how close we were in the end. Assumption number 1. You are a corporeal entity. That's right. You probably wanted us to assume that you were some kind of digital ghost, didn't you? Some mysterious, ethereal thought form existing only in the realm of cyberspace while you sneak around Site-31 making mischief. We're afraid that the ghost has been given up, so to speak. As clever as you are, it isn't quite as clever as you believe yourself to be. You've gotten sloppy at times, and in these moments you've given us a wealth of evidence. Don't you think the Foundation researchers and guards, people trained to notice even the most minute anomalous interference, wouldn't notice doors opening and closing on their own? Equipment moving, computer terminals activated despite no digital trace of approved Foundation login credentials. We must say we're a little insulted by how much you've underestimated us here. We know the files you've accessed. We know that you're aware of some of the monstrosities the Foundation deals with: ghosts, deadly viruses, reality warpers, some creatures that can shapeshift or become invisible, deadly memes for goodness sake. Did you really think our personnel would see the signs of your meddling and think, it was probably nothing? That's a rather dangerous oversight on your part. Assumption number 2. You're attracted to information about yourself. Don't try to deny this one, SCP-3393. The fact you're still watching this video is proof of your self-obsession, and you've left your digital fingerprints all over any other file that made the mistake of mentioning you. We have pages upon pages of logs showing your long record of unauthorized access, and the grand majority of the files you accessed were about you. Like we said, you're a vain little creature. That much is plain to see. This leads us nicely on to assumption number 3. You seek out this information about yourself in order to make changes to it, or even delete it entirely if it displeases you. We'll admit this one we find the most frustrating. It's one thing to access files without our permission, quite another to mess with our hard work. We get enough problems from Technical Director Rosen already without needing to constantly pester him about improving file security. The file about you has undergone a number of needless modifications and deletions. The following was a personal favorite. Quote, Object Class Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. Don't worry, I can handle this. Description. I wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to exist. At least not like this. But let me deal with it. This thing that I am is best kept away from all of you. Don't try to analyze me or test me or whatever. I don't want any of you to catch what I have. Just call me self-containing and we'll be good. End quote. We suppose you thought this one was pretty funny, right? You're clearly an intelligent creature, who or whatever you are, but the clear arrogance on display here doesn't suit you. While you may coast off of your anti-memetic properties, it is important to remember that you aren't untouchable. Speaking of which, assumption number 4. Your anti-memetic properties can be transferred. We found this to be a particular interesting wrinkle in your story. We know you've got a sense of humor, so you'll have to appreciate the irony in your attempts to alter or destroy information about yourself, telling us more about you than we ever knew before. Initially, when other files were reported missing, we thought you must have been deleting them out of spite.
However, upon further examination, we found that the files were still very much there, and you were the last user to access them. This is perhaps the most dangerous thing about you, and we don't even know if you knew it until now. Your anti-memetic properties have a tendency to rub off and affect the things you interact with. With a power like that, you could compromise the whole database. And obviously, we can't allow that to happen. Assumption number 5. You have a strong resistance to memetic agents, much to our frustration. We know that they can affect you, of course, but your tolerance is far higher than that of the average human being. We needed to load this video with some of our very best just to make sure it would actually work. Your memetic resistance has even foiled certain prior containment attempts. So you've really been making us earn our keep, SCP-3393. Assumption number 6. You are confined to Site-31. This is another inconvenient truth for you, isn't it? First, we need to figure out you're a corporeal being, existing out here in space-time with the rest of us, and then we figure out exactly which space and time you're occupying. Can you feel the net tightening around you, 3393? Of course, we don't want you to be nervous. Just sit tight and enjoy the video. You're a very clever anomaly after all. Far too clever to be contained by the likes of us. You've been performing your operations right under the noses of Site-31's most talented personnel. All the phenomenon we've been attributing to you, from the open doors to the tampered computer terminals, have occurred exclusively in Site-31. And while we may not be able to track down your account and strip it of its phony clearances, did you know we can log which computer terminals unauthorized access to our files comes from? That's just basic cybersecurity, and we don't need to tell you that all of your unauthorized accesses have been logged to Site-31 terminals. Very sloppy, 3393. Or should we call you Dr. Mackey? Forgive us if that isn't your name. We hate to jump to conclusions here at the Foundation, but we couldn't help but notice that your anomalous activity began shortly after a researcher named Dr. Mackey disappeared from Site-31. Interestingly, much like you, Dr. Mackey isn't remembered by anyone else on the site. We only know Dr. Mackey worked here from records we discovered not too long ago. We know that Dr. Mackey was conducting experiments here, though data on the particulars of those experiments have been destroyed by you, we presume. We also presume that you were most likely either Dr. Mackey or the product of one of Dr. Mackey's experiments. We've made a few attempts to nab you already, but you've always slipped through the cracks. Like the sweep of Site-31 where we sent in MTF-810 See No Evil, our team that specializes in combating visual cognito hazards. Those guys are tough cookies, and they're damn good at their job, so it is a mystery how you evaded them. Our current best guess is that you were hiding in some undocumented location within the site. Our attempts at memetic incapacitation were equally unsuccessful. As we mentioned before, it's clear that you have a greater resilience to memetic agents than any of your non-anomalous counterparts. We estimate that even a kill agent would probably do little more than weaken you. That is impressive, we'll give you that. Our estimation for why you've been able to so handedly thwart our attempts at containing you is that your access to the system has also given you access to all of our plans. You know exactly what's going on before we even execute the attempt, giving you time to think up and execute an effective countermeasure. But we here at the Foundation believe that knowledge is power, SCP-3393, and we have more than enough to finally contain you. Don't panic, it's already essentially over, but we'll do you the courtesy of explaining how we got you in the end. Welcome to Operation Bait the Hook. We know you're within Site-31, and we know you're attracted to information about yourself. So we limited the scope of where this handy little video could be viewed to 5 terminals in the site. We put measures in place to notify us whenever the file was accessed, and from which terminal, at which point MTF-810 would be dispatched to seal off all available exits and quarantine the room around the terminal, a process that would only take several minutes. Just enough time for a vain little creature to watch a video about itself, as it's forever entombed within the telltale terminal that finally gave it away. You wouldn't be brought into a containment chamber, so we simply brought the containment chamber to you. As the network connections for this particular terminal are shut off, we can safely say you won't be causing us problems anymore. You're a very clever anomaly, SCP-3393, just not quite as clever as us. If you ever take a trip across the pond to some of the more rural parts of the British Isles, you might just hear some tales of a dark, shadowy shape, a creature stalking through the night, an omen of death. It's an entity that has been known by many names, including the Grim or Black Shuck. Most folks will tell you the same, that this nightmare takes on the form of a huge black dog, but is also known to be able to change its shape. Often appearing at nighttime, the apparition is said to be demonic in nature, commonly associated with the devil himself, believed by some to be a hellhound like Garmer and Cerberus, guardians of the underworld in Norse and Greek mythology. The dog is far larger than your average pet, with big glowing eyes. It is also known to stalk crossroads, ancient pathways, and places where executions took place. Those who catch sight of Black Shuck are often befallen with bad luck, and for some it can even mean that death will soon be upon them. Of course, this is nothing more than a bit of local folklore, spooky tales designed to drum up tourism. But is the Black Shuck really just a legend, or is there something more to the tale? After all, it's not as if a dog like that could really exist, could it? Enter SCP-023, otherwise known as, yes, you guessed it, the Black Shuck. Much like the creatures from the stories, SCP-023 is an entity possessing a canine form, far larger than most domesticated dogs. SCP-023 is described as being shaggy in appearance, with black fur and glowing orange-red eyes, as well as prominent fangs. Through testing, the SCP Foundation has determined a number of the dog's anomalous abilities. First and foremost, legends have described the Black Shuck as an apparition or spirit, and much in the same vein, SCP-023 is able to pass right through solid matter. The creature can pass through walls seemingly at will, but does also seem to have a physical form, at least when it is kept in containment. To prevent a breach, the Foundation keeps SCP-023 in a walled-off intersection of 2 corridors, sporting fake doors at 3 of its 4 ends, with only one real entrance. Why does the dog's containment unit require such a specific layout? Simple. It has to resemble a crossroad, even if this is merely a superficial resemblance. Remember that the Black Shuck of legend often appeared at crossroads, a sign that would warn those traveling of their impending doom. As long as SCP-023 remains contained in a cell resembling crossroads, it cannot pass through walls. Should the Black Shuck ever escape this enclosure, however, then it will use its anomalous abilities to incinerate anything in its path. The dog can burn through walls no matter how dense, and will travel from location to location by this method. Also in keeping with the Shuck of folklore, looking into the eyes of SCP-023 can hold potentially devastating outcomes. Should any person make direct eye contact with the dog, then death will be upon them. Within the span of the next full year, either the person who looked at the Black Shuck in the eye or a close member of their family will die, just like a number of the legends state. The Foundation has no concrete idea how the Shuck chooses its victims, with no patterns or obvious preferences, only that they will die a year after eye contact. Researchers aren't even sure if SCP-023 selects its victims from the moment eye contact is made, or if this choice is made during the year that follows, or even if it is a conscious choice at all. All that is known for certain is that if you were to look into the beast's glowing eyes, there would be no way for you to tell if you or a relative would suffer the consequences, only when. In the past, the SCP Foundation attempted to eliminate an individual that looked into SCP-023's eyes, along with their whole family before the year was up, trying to take any potential victims away from the Black Shuck before they could be hunted down by the anomalous canine. Much like the way the creature passes through walls by incinerating solid matter, the way SCP-023 dispatches its chosen victims seem to almost be linked to the use of heat. The Foundation has conducted a number of autopsies on those killed by SCP-023, and their findings have always yielded the same result. Anyone killed by the Black Shuck will not exhibit any signs of external damage, no burn marks on their skin or any kind of contusions. However, on closer inspection, these bodies appear to have been filled in, their insides replaced with highly compacted ash. All their organs and internal bodily systems appear to be incinerated by the Black Shuck,
But somehow this occurs so rapidly that there is no notable damage caused to the outside of their bodies. To prevent SCP-023 claiming any further victims, the Foundation has another measure in place. The Black Shuck has been fitted with 2 spheres made of hard rubber. These are inserted into the creature's sunken-in eye sockets, blocking anyone from accidentally making eye contact with it. However, over time, thanks to the heating effect of the Shuck's state, these inserts will begin to degrade. When security cameras detect that the glow of SCP-023's eyes have returned to a dangerous level, Foundation personnel will have to replace the rubber spheres to once again block the creature's vision. However, this can only be done after sunset, and any personnel tasked with replacing the inserts are cautioned not to look the dog in the eyes during the process, unless they want to become the Black Shuck's next victim. The SCP Foundation first came into contact with SCP-023 when they received information about an attack that had taken place at a church. While the location of this incident is unknown, if the legends are to be believed, the church may have been located in the moors of a rural region of the British Isles. While the church was in the middle of a service, the Black Shuck entered and killed a number of civilians in attendance.
Presumably, the members of this congregation had all at some point seen the large black dog out in the moors, or one of their relatives had.
The Foundation stepped in and managed to capture the Black Shuck, giving amnestics to the survivors that had witnessed the attack. The damage done by SCP-023 and the deaths it caused were covered up as attempted arson. However, the Foundation's trouble with SCP-023 was far from over. After the Black Shuck's capture at the church, the dog was able to breach containment on multiple occasions. At first, it had been placed in a standard containment chamber, but it was quickly able to incinerate through the concrete walls of the cell. Foundation personnel later discovered that the dog had settled in an intersection between 2 corridors and realized that it had resembled a crossroad. These exact corridors became the basis for SCP-023's new containment chamber, and the assistant researcher originally assigned to the dog was reprimanded for negligence. During this and other escape attempts, SCP-023 caused the deaths of a high number of Foundation personnel. As a direct result, researchers assigned to it requested that the Black Shuck be reclassified as a Keter-class anomaly. They also noted that SCP-023 shared certain traits with SCP-1111-1, one of the 2 entities that form SCP-1111. SCP-1111-1, also referred to as the White Dog, possesses an almost ghostly translucent canine form and abilities that focus on geographic space. In the White Dog's case, it will attack anyone it detects approaching SCP-1111-2, the body of an unidentified man hanging from a noose. Researchers working for the Foundation believe that SCP-023 and SCP-1111-1 might be instances of the same phenomenon, but have been unable to capture the White Dog in order to verify this. Given the number of deaths the Black Shuck had caused, research personnel attempted to reduce the danger that they faced when interacting with the dog. They helped to remove the beast's eyes and teeth, thus making it safer. However, it was during an attempt to do so that SCP-023 once again managed to breach containment. At first, everything seemed to be going according to plan, but when researchers removed SCP-023's eyes, the Black Shuck vanished completely from its containment area. SCP security staff scoured the area for it, eventually tracking the dog down to a long stretch of interstate. It is still unknown exactly how many civilians may have seen the Black Shuck as they drove past it, but so far 9 deaths are thought to have stemmed from this incident. The ghostly dog was recaptured, and D-Class personnel removed its fangs. After analyzing the times of incidents, researchers realized that SCP-023 had only been able to escape while the sun was up, leading to new containment procedures mandating that no staff member was to interact with the Shuck until after sunset. The interstate fiasco led to the doctor assigned to watch over SCP-023 being suspended and facing a disciplinary review from his Foundation superiors. The blame for the breach in security that caused the incident was placed at his feet, and a new doctor was placed in charge of observing the Black Shuck. Unfortunately for this new researcher, the incidents involving SCP-023 did not stop there. The newly appointed doctor attempted to give the dog a pair of glass eyes to replace the ones that had been removed before the previous containment breach. Perhaps they thought it was a gesture of kindness, a compassionate act. Or maybe they just thought it would look cool for a dog to have glass eyes. No matter the reason, it seemed they had forgotten for a moment that this huge shadow creature was an ancient evil entity and not a dog at all. When the doctor gave the new glass eyes to SCP-023, they immediately took on the exact same properties as its old ones. They began glowing, molten glass leaking from the dog's sockets, and appeared on all reflective surfaces throughout the site the Shuck was being held at. Everything from mirrors and windows to lenses and glasses, computer monitors, anything and everything glass. The Foundation suffered an enormous number of deaths that day. Even staff sitting in the cafeteria would have seen a version of those orange glowing eyes staring at them from the bottom of their bowls, marking them for a fiery death. The facility was quickly evacuated, but the damage had already been done. Anyone that had seen a reflection of the Black Shuck's eyes would be dead within a year. Devastated, the new doctor in charge of overseeing SCP-023 blamed themselves for dooming their research team, as well as the rest of the Foundation staff in the facility. When the sun came up over the horizon, a number of D-Class personnel were sent into SCP-023's enclosure, only to find that the dog had once again vanished. The only trace it had left behind was a puddle of molten glass burning part of the floor. A year later, any and all personnel that had gazed into the Black Shuck's eyes were dead, and their remains were buried in a mass, unmarked grave near the containment facility. Despite the doctor vowing to recapture and contain SCP-023, it remains unclear if they were ever actually successful. There is a chance that the Black Shuck has been gradually making its way back home, to the moors of the British Isles. If so, we advise you not to travel after sundown unless you absolutely have to. And if you find yourself at a crossroad, then pray you don't catch sight of a hulking demonic hound staring out at you with eyes that burn through the dark. If you do, well, we hope you enjoy your year. Researcher Ellis was having a very long day. Working at the SCP Foundation can sound like a pretty exciting job to an outsider. The problem is, when you deal with something exciting every day of your life, it starts to become as mundane as brushing your teeth or pouring your morning bowl of breakfast cereal. Over time, everything loses its magic. She had the unenviable job of double-checking the anomalies in C-Wing of Site-77, glorified box ticking. She trudged from containment chamber to containment chamber, everything seeming to be in order. Tick, tick, tick. It was all Euclid and safe class anomalies anyway, hardly major containment risks. But when she reached the chamber for SCP-6805, the security cameras normally used to observe the anomaly were on the fritz. She'd need to go inside. Great. When the chamber doors opened, she felt an immediate chill. Her breath came out as an icy fog. In the distance, she saw a jar sitting on a podium, the glass so frosted over she couldn't quite make out what was inside. No sign of a containment breach. She ticked the box next to SCP-2805 on her clipboard and moved on. Several hours later, Researcher Ellis was at home, finally able to relax. Since she started working at the Foundation, dealing with deadly creatures and cursed artifacts on a daily basis, she'd longed for the simple comforts of childhood in her downtime. That's why she decided to spend her evening with a warm mug of hot chocolate, a bowl of ice cream, and her favorite animated Disney movie, Mulan. She had just pressed play when she got a phone call from an unknown number. With a frustrated groan, she picked up the phone and answered. The voice on the other end was a little gravelly, but it sounded kind. His diction was old-fashioned, a man from a bygone era.
"Why, hello there, young lady. I hope this isn't a bad time," he said. "The name's Walt Disney. Perhaps you've seen some of my motion pictures. I was wondering if I could trouble you for some help with a project of mine."
This might have been some stupid prank call. Maybe Dr. Bryant or Dr. Clef was bored and decided they wanted to mess with her. The fact that she was watching a Disney movie at the time was pure coincidence. After all, they own half the movies out there these days. But that's when Walt carried on talking to her.
"You see, my dear, I'm a little short on time at the moment. I realize I, perhaps don't have the longevity that I used to. I won't get into the illness right now, but What I do know is that I might not be able to put my final idea into practice, and I believe that you and your organization may be able to help. Your, what is it called? SCP Foundation? And that changed everything. Researcher Ellis immediately knew that this wasn't a prank call. A member of Foundation staff would never discuss Foundation matters, even as a joke, over an unsecured line, and a civilian would have no reason to even know about the Foundation. Was she actually on the phone with the Walt Disney? It seemed odd and a little more than unlikely on account of him being dead for over 50 years. If only Researcher Ellis had checked her clipboard a little closer, then maybe she would have realized that she was already under the anomalous effects of SCP-6805, also humorously known as Disney on Ice. Here's a fun question for you. What's your favorite Disney movie? Probably not what you expected to hear from your friends at SCP Explained. But seriously, we want to know. Tell us down in the comments. Maybe you're a classical purist and you consider Snow White, Cinderella, or Sleeping Beauty to be the best. Maybe you're a fan of the Disney Renaissance and it's The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, or The Lion King that are the true masterpieces. Or perhaps you're a fan of their more modern outings like Tangled, Frozen, and Moana, or even their acquisitions like Marvel movies or the Star Wars series. Personally, I'm partial to Tron Legacy. We could go on, but honestly, we'd be here all day. The Walt Disney Company, started by Walter Elias Disney and his brother Roy back in 1923, has become one of the most powerful and influential entertainment companies in existence. Their corporate machine is so huge and sprawling, it rivals the size and scope of the SCP Foundation itself, and it's influenced the way we look at everything from mice to pirates to Norse legends to space battles. Some give the United States President the title Leader of the Free World, but anyone in that position would happily drop everything to take a phone call from the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, even today. The company may be a global superpower these days, but none of it would have been possible without Walt himself. Born in 1901, Walt started his legendary company at the tender age of 22. Who would have known that he would leave such an indelible mark on human culture during his 65 years of life? But he's not just an entrepreneur, animator, writer, voice actor, and film producer. He's also, decades after his death, an anomaly currently in the capable hands of the SCP Foundation. Well, his cryogenically frozen severed head is, anyway. And simply looking at that severed head is what puts such an anomalous damper on Researcher Ellis's nice, quiet evening. Confused? Don't worry. Let's start this demented Disney fairy tale at the beginning, by which we mean the end of Walt Disney's life. Walt Disney accomplished more in his life than many of us would be able to claim in several lifetimes. He'd built one of the most enduring entertainment companies of all time, won countless awards, and made millions of dollars from his creations, including the Disneyland theme parks. The man had essentially made his own name synonymous with magic, childhood whimsy, and dreams coming true. However, rather than focusing on the past, Walt wanted to keep his eyes on the future. His grand vision went far beyond movies and theme parks. He wanted to shape the way humanity lived for centuries to come. And the name of this vision? Epcot, or the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. While you may know Epcot as a mere portion of the theme park in the Florida Walt Disney Resort, Walt himself actually intended it to be so much more. As the full name suggests, he dreamed of creating a functional community of tomorrow with over 20,000 residents. In his own words, Epcot will take its cue from the new ideas and new technologies that are now emerging from the creative centers of American industry. It will be a community of tomorrow that will never be completed, but will always be introducing and testing and demonstrating new materials and new systems. And Epcot will always be a showcase to the world of the ingenuity and imagination of American free enterprise. It was certainly a utopian idea, though fans of BioShock might find their eye twitching with flashbacks to Andrew Ryan's disastrous Rapture. However, Disney's problem didn't lie in his plans, but in himself. Despite his achievements and larger-than-life legacy, he was still a mortal man. When Walt tragically contracted lung cancer, he finally became aware of the fact that he may not live to see his beautiful Epcot dream completed. And despite having all the money and fame a man could possibly ask for,
He was beginning to realize that his fortune couldn't buy him a second of extra time. Or could it? This question would soon be answered when representatives of a mysterious company known as the Onoroi Collective approached Walt. The strange thing, though, was that the entities that comprised this elusive group of interest contacted Walt in his dreams. You see, the Onoroi Collective are a group of entities known as the Onoroi, or Dreamers, who exist only in the dream space, but sometimes interact with our world through anomalous, sometimes semi-organic creations they sell as products. In that sense, they were the original Imagineers. Their creations include SCP-2028, a few hundred snow globes that allow the user to remove and store their nightmares and negative feelings within, and SCP-1498, which are creatures made from old-fashioned rotary phones trailing a huge number of wires, coiled and arranged into sheep-like bodies. By calling the phone on the creature's face, a person can order a custom dreamscape from the Onoroi. Naturally, as creatures who depend on dreams to survive, the Onoroi were big fans of Walt Disney, a man who built a career of encouraging children to dream their little hearts out. In exchange for his contributions to the dreamscape, they'd cut him a deal. They'd give him a special kind of Onoroi technology that would allow his consciousness to continue to exist and interact with the physical realm after his death. All they'd need to keep was his head. It was certainly a strange deal, but Walt was thinking of his children, his grandchildren, and their children and grandchildren. If he died now, then his Tomorrowland dreams would die with him. He'd simply be known for some charming animated films and a couple of amusing theme parks, not for truly changing the future. It seemed that the deal with the Onoroi Collective was too good to resist. The deal was struck, and arrangements were made to preserve Disney's head and consciousness after his death. 10 days after his 65th birthday, on December 15, 1966, Walt Disney passed away. But that was only the beginning of his new anomalous life. While the public mourned, Disney's head was secretly removed and preserved in a jar with anomalous cryonics technology. The device is also fixed to a pair of rotary phones, a trademark of the Onoroi, and an inscription that reads, "Siberian Solutions from the Onoroi Collective." The anomalous effect was simple. Anyone who looked directly at Disney's frozen head would receive a phone call in the next 24 hours. This phone call would be from Walt Disney himself, presumably inhabiting the Onoroi dreamscape now. With this handy trick, he'd be able to maintain his communications with the rest of the Walt Disney Company in secret and see the creation of his precious Epcot project to its completion. But unfortunately, that's not actually how it happened. Following Walt's death, his brother Roy took over all Walt Disney Company operations. While the profitability of the company didn't suffer under Roy's control, Walt's final dream did. Epcot mutated from the sustainable, functional community of the future that Walt desired into a mere theme park, the Disney-fied World's Fair that all Orlando Disney Park visitors of today would recognize. As it turned out, most people in the Disney company weren't actually eager to take orders from the former CEO's severed head. As a result, he became kind of a dark company secret, hidden away within the Disney parks. After a number of reports of calls from Walt Disney after the entrepreneur's death, the Foundation finally started to take notice. They conducted a thorough investigation of the various Disney bases of operation and eventually found Disney's frozen head, soon redesignated SCP-2805, in a secret compartment in the legendary Pirates of the Caribbean ride. He was relocated to Site-77 soon after for further testing, where his anomalous abilities were later discovered. Sadly for SCP-2805, while his calls to Foundation staff have all consisted of attempts in enlisting the Foundation's help in making his Epcot dreams a reality, nobody has yet taken him up on the offer. Since his containment, the Foundation's main priority has just been suppressing conspiracy theories about the existence of Walt Disney's cryogenically frozen head, a task which they undertake with collaboration from the Disney Company. In order to muddy the waters, in 1981 they began productions of Walt Disney's World on Ice, later known as Disney on Ice, a traveling ice skating show. Since then, they also released the incredibly successful film Frozen and its sequel, to corrupt any searches for key phrases like Disney's Frozen or Walt Ice. It's been an incredibly effective smokescreen, as you can probably expect from the SCP Foundation. And sadly for Walt and fans of a mid-century perspective on the future, it's likely that Walt Disney's dreams will stay within his disembodied head. So if you're hoping to prove the existence of this truly wild anomaly, or somehow get in contact with Walt and help him bring Epcot to its intended glory, you should probably just let it go. The SCP Foundation specializes in tracking anomalous creatures, entities, or objects, and protecting mankind by keeping these anomalies contained. It doesn't happen very often, though, that an SCP surrenders itself to the Foundation, offering to be contained without putting up a fight. You might think that that would be a welcome change for the Foundation's personnel, getting an easy containment like that rather than having to devote valuable time, resources, and even lives to capturing an anomaly. But then you have to ask the obvious and worrying questions. How did this anomaly know where to find the Foundation so that it could turn itself in the first place? Did somebody send it? And if so, why? Well, don't worry. You don't need to try and imagine this scenario, because an SCP turning itself over to the Foundation under mysterious circumstances has actually already happened. One day, security personnel at an SCP Foundation containment site opened the front door to find an SCP just sitting there on the doorstep. The anomaly was brought in for questioning, and while it was soon designated SCP-032, it has sometimes been known by another name, Brother's Bride. SCP-032 is a person, or rather a replica of a person. Not a living statue that moves whenever you look away or a waxwork that comes to life when the sun goes down. No, this replica is far stranger. SCP-032 resembles a human woman around 30 years of age. Who made her, who she is supposed to resemble, and just where exactly she came from are all still questions the Foundation have been unable to answer. But what the research teams have been able to determine is what she is made from. Brother's Bride consists largely of plastics, at least the external portion of her body. Her skin is made from a combination of 5.5mm thick silicone and other plastic fiber polymers, all colored with a pigment to more closely mimic the shade of Caucasian human skin. SCP-032 has been referred to as a Type F human simulacrum by the Foundation, meaning that she has an imperfect outward resemblance to a human being, and the internal workings of her body are drastically different from an ordinary human's organs or central nervous system. What does SCP-032 have instead? Well, she lacks any skeleton or any of the other internal parts that make up a human body. Instead, her insides are entirely refined liquid oil. However, in spite of having no bones, no organs, and existing as just pure oil filling up a plastic skin, SCP-032 has no problem moving on her own or communicating verbally. When she was first discovered waiting outside the Foundation's Slovakian compound, Brother's Bride claimed that she had come there to be stored. SCP-032 is imperfect in how closely she resembles a human being, and this becomes more apparent the closer one gets to her. At a distance, she can maintain some illusion of appearing to be fully human. However, her appearance becomes less and less convincing as someone approaches. Naturally, the sight of an uncanny, rubbery, almost human is enough to unsettle someone, perhaps even cause discomfort. But this also happens to be unrelated to SCP-032's anomalous abilities, which she detailed to Foundation personnel when she was first contained. The Foundation security team that discovered SCP-032 patiently sitting and waiting to be found questioned her motives and how she had come to be there. There was no record of what time she might have arrived on the compound's security cameras, and SCP-032 gave the personnel no inkling as to how she knew the location of the Foundation's Slovakian site. Somehow, she'd managed to approach without being spotted by anyone, but would not explain how she had done so. Security personnel at the site were obviously skeptical and asked Brother's Bride why she had come to the Foundation. SCP-032 claimed that her creators had commanded her to, that she was to be placed in indefinite storage until claimed. Although the silicon-based woman appears to possess a normal level of cognitive function, she claims that she is not fully sapient, meaning SCP-032 does not possess the intelligence or understanding of other human beings, at least according to her. By her own admission, SCP-032 is an intermediary, acting on behalf of her creators, although the SCP Foundation has yet to be able to verify this. As for her anomalous abilities, SCP-032 was kind enough to detail these to the security personnel that first found her. She has an innate ability to influence any biological entity in her immediate vicinity. In other words, any organism that gets too close. Well, not quite any.
there is a limitation to her power. SCP-032 can only affect a creature or organism not created by, related to, or influenced by humanity. So, plants, animals, even microorganisms like bacteria all fall into the category of things that SCP-032 has an effect on. According to the various tests the Foundation's researchers have conducted, the exact nature of how SCP-032's abilities work seems to vary, but her presence always causes massive and irreversible damage to an animal or organism's ability to exchange or use energy. For example, when SCP-032 is surrounded by wild flora, these plants will lose the ability to conduct the process of photosynthesis. They therefore can no longer produce or consume energy, preventing them from continued growth and ultimately causing death. In much the same vein, any animals that come into close contact with SCP-032 will find themselves unable to use their respiratory or digestive systems, rendering them unable to breathe oxygen or properly consume food. Not even germs and other microorganisms are safe from SCP-032's effects. Although when it comes to these microscopic life forms, her ability seems to focus solely on their reproductive systems, and if bacteria cannot divide itself, it cannot spread. At present, the SCP Foundation keeps Brothers Bride housed in an automated containment unit, restricting the amount of direct contact personnel can have with her. Unless they are there to conduct authorized experiments or other necessary research-related tasks, staff are to leave SCP-032 alone. Any interviews with her are not even carried out in person, and instead researchers use a remote communication array to ask SCP-032 more about her origin, her creators, and her abilities. This probably seems a little overcautious, right? After all, SCP-032 has no effect on the human body, and isn't aggressive or outwardly hostile. Maybe locking her in a room is excessive, but remember, her degenerative abilities do affect microorganisms and bacteria, even those that are beneficial to human beings. The human body is full of good bacteria that aids with digestion and helps the body absorb nutrients, like the ones you've heard about in ads for probiotic yogurt. Since 032's effects don't discriminate between good and bad bacteria, people have to keep their distance from SCP-032, or else they might find that they can no longer digest food properly. In fact, no biological material is allowed anywhere near her. No houseplants, no pets, nothing. Oddly, SCP-032 herself seems fine with this, and has never expressed any desire for any form of comfort, and does not appear to require sustenance like food or water. Shortly after she was first contained by the SCP Foundation, SCP-032 was interviewed by Dr. Alexander Kovac, the resident psychologist at the site where Brothers Bride was discovered. Dr. Kovac initially tried to ask SCP-032 to disclose her name. However, she was unable to do so. "I don't have one. People have names. I'm not one." She then went on to explain that even her creators had no name for her, and that she was instructed to cooperate with the SCP Foundation. Dr. Kovac pressed on, asking about when she told security that she was to be stored until collected, who SCP-032 had meant was coming to collect her. Her answer was as enigmatic as could be expected. She claimed that she was going to be collected by someone her creators wished to torment, and finding her in the hands of the SCP Foundation would bring this person greater suffering. Kovac asked if this person was part of the Foundation, assuming that SCP-032's creators had some kind of animosity towards a particular member of personnel, and that 032 was part of some kind of revenge plot against a member of Foundation's staff. SCP-032 denied this though, stating, "He is not one of you, merely a one-time sympathizer of sorts. He believes you tried to help him once, and if he is forced here, if he finds me here, you will die. That will hurt him. They have no interest in any of you or your organization. You are here as a tool, just as I am." According to SCP-032, the man coming to collect her was a prideful, complacent figure who won when he should have lost. Somehow this individual had apparently been punished by being forced to live in exile from his kin and wander the world endlessly, destroying anything in his path, yet unwillingly. His very presence would poison human beings, leaving this man trapped in eternal solitude, tormented by the weight of his guilty conscience. SCP-032 described the man's punishment as a masterwork of torment. She described her purpose in being sent to the Foundation as being to act as this man's last undoing. Apparently, this wanderer would occasionally find solace in looking at nature and find hope in the world around him. Her ability to destroy the organisms around her would be a way to break this man's will and the final nail in the proverbial coffin. Apparently, SCP-032's appearance was also seemingly meant to deceive him. She stated that the man would recognize her and this would remind him of fond memories. But then as he got closer, he would see SCP-032 for what she really was. A crude replica of a human being, reminding this man that her likeness would be forever out of his reach. SCP-032 was intended by her creators to be as artificial as the wandering man's hope, and when he eventually found her, either in a day, a month, or in a century, she would destroy his very last source of solace. At the conclusion of the interview, Dr. Kovac asked why this man would recognize her, and SCP-032 simply replied, "I used to be his wife." If we take SCP-032 at her word, then it appears she was created with the intention of being used to torment this wandering man and act as a final punishment for him. In another interview 6 months after her initial containment, SCP-032 expressed a hatred for the man's wife whom she was made to resemble. Sent in to assess SCP-032's cognitive abilities and personality, or lack of, Dr. Kovac questioned this. SCP-032 had always been adamant that she had no conscious thoughts or feelings of her own, and when challenged by the doctor, she claimed that she hated her mold because her creators wanted her to. The first thing SCP-032's creators had done after making her was show her the wife of the man they hoped to torment. It is unclear whether SCP-032 was shown photographs or the actual woman she had been molded from. Not an easy task, as this woman, the wife, was apparently long dead. But the creators had risked disturbing the wife's final rest, just to show her to SCP-032. She was beautiful, so peaceful, serene, whole, even gone, even dead. I could see the essence of who she used to be, of who she still was and forever will be, her soul. They told me she didn't get to live for all that long, but when she lived, she was herself. She was alive, and so I hated her. In the wife's face, SCP-032 saw a reflection of herself and realized that she had been made just to be a mockery, a parody of a living human being existing only to cause misery to the wandering man who would one day find her. Instead of skin, she had molded silicone and plastic synthetic fiber in place of hair and oil for blood. But what SCP-032 lacked, she realized, was a soul. This was all part of the brothers' design, according to SCP-032. When the man found her, he would see not only what had been done to the memory of his wife, but he'd also see how much SCP-032 hated her, and hated herself for not being alive the same way the wife had been. The goal of all of this, to make the man realize that he never won. SCP-032 herself is a mystery, but perhaps the real question is, who do you think this man is, and what was it he didn't win? But that's a story for another day. Let us know what you think down in the comments. Now go check out SCP-5545 Mysterious Tunnels in Antarctica Abnormality and SCP-1730 What Happened to Site-13 The Full Story Compilation for more of the most mysterious SCPs.